Someone is coughing behind the wall. Then there's a low growl. Not a dog, not a bear. Nothing Daniel had ever heard in his 29 years living in Seattle. He opens his eyes on the stone floor of an empty store and realizes the city is gone. No rain. His world is gone. But a glowing window hangs before him, offering him ownership. The cold hits him first, that deep, stony cold that only exists in places where people haven't lived for a long time. Daniel stares at the ceiling, gray, cracked, with a dark spot in the corner. Mold, or blood. His back burns as if he'd been thrown from a height and left behind, dust and metal in his mouth. He struggles to sit up and the world sways, the walls drift, then they settle back into place. 40 square meters of emptiness, a cracked counter against the far wall, bare shelves without a single item. A sign hangs on the wall, strange letters, an unfamiliar language, crooked, faded symbols. But Daniel reads them as easily as he would read English. One word. Store. He blinks, reads it again. Store. Outside, someone is coughing again, long and wet. Daniel remembers the headlights. White light. A blow. And the thought of taking inventory of cigarettes. And then this floor, this ceiling, this cold. He runs his hand over the floor, a thick layer of dust. Months, maybe years. He looks at his hands, the same fingers, the same small scar on the knuckle from a can of food that slipped in his 3rd year on the job. He touches his face, his nose, his cheekbones. Everything is in place. But the parking lot is gone. The store on the corner of 4th and Pine is gone. Seattle is gone. The rain is gone. He gets to his feet. His knees creak. He takes a step toward the counter. The floorboards creak. He places his hands on the surface and runs his fingers along it. Dust parts into 2 clean trails. And the air before his eyes flickers. A translucent window hangs right in the void. Bluish light, clear letters. Point of sale system activated. Welcome, owner. Daniel scans the room. Cobwebs, broken glass, rat droppings by the wall. He looks at the window again and says one word aloud. Inventory. The window responds. Current inventory, 0. Store level, 0. Transactions, 0. Premises condition, critical. Daniel nods. 0 isn't scary. He started from scratch twice in his past life. A failed location in Tacoma where the former manager stole half the inventory. A basement flooded by a hurricane. Both times, he turned the store into a profit within 3 months. True, back then he had suppliers, and electricity, and the police within 15 minutes. He looks through the broken window. The sky outside is greenish, as if someone had dripped swamp water into the sunset. On the horizon, the crooked silhouettes of buildings. Not a single light. A dead city. Or almost dead. Because the coughing means someone lives here. The first rule of any store. First you make the space livable, then you think about the inventory. He finds a scrap of a rag in the corner, shakes it. Dust flies up in a cloud. He covers his nose with his sleeve and wipes the counter, centimeter by centimeter, from left to right. His hands know what to do even when his head hasn't yet figured out where he is. The wood beneath the dust turns out to be sturdy. A crack down the center, but not all the way through. It's usable. He moves on to the shelves. He removes the broken board and sets it aside. Wood is a resource in a world like this. He shovels the debris into a corner with his bare hands. 20 minutes later, the counter is clean. The system flashes. The room's condition is critical. But now there's a small arrow pointing up next to it. Daniel goes down to the basement. The stone steps are surprisingly intact. It's dark down there. He waits for his eyes to adjust. 3 wooden crates line the walls. He opens the first one. Dried herbs hit his nose with a bitter, spicy scent. Sage. His grandmother used to brew it when he was sick as a child. The second crate. Strips of dried meat. Dark. Tough. He sniffs. Not rotten. Edible. The third crate. Salt. Coarse. Grayish. 500 grams. The system updates the data. 3 items. Dried sage, dried meat, salt. For a store in a dead town, this is practically a luxury. He climbs back up. The light outside the window is fading. The day is ending. He doesn't know what time it is. He doesn't know what year it is. He knows one thing. The store has to open in the morning. He props the front door open with a broken board. The door is warped. A draft blows through the finger-wide gap. But it's a door, and it's closed. Daniel sits right on the floor. He bites off a strip of meat. Tough. Salty. The taste is unfamiliar. Not beef and not pork. Something else. He chews and looks at the system, which glows quietly in the corner of his vision. He finishes eating, closes his eyes. Tomorrow is his first day on the job. Sleep overtakes him instantly. Morning bursts in with noise. A creak. Shuffling. Someone is standing behind the door. Daniel jumps up. His body is stiff from the night spent on the stone. He approaches the door. The shuffling stops. Then a knock. Faint. 3 taps with knuckles. The system flashes. Potential client detected. He moves the board aside, opens the door. An old man stands on the threshold, skinny, dirty, with a face like a baked apple. What's left of his jacket has turned into a rag with sleeves. In his hand he clutches a ring, iron, maybe copper, with a cloudy stone. The old man looks behind Daniel, at the counter, at the shelves, at the sign, and asks if this really is a store. Daniel looks at his trembling hands, at his boots worn down to the soles. The dust on them is light, local, so he lives nearby. On the old man's face is that mixture of hope and readiness to give up that Daniel has seen 1,000 times. People come in knowing they don't have enough money, but come in anyway because they have nowhere else to go. He steps aside and says the store is open. The old man enters, looks around, presses the ring to his chest. Then he places it on the counter and says he wants to trade it for food. His wife has been coughing for 2 days. She needs something hot, and they have nothing left. Daniel takes the ring. He turns it over in his hand. The stone is cloudy but intact. The metal looks like copper. In the normal world, it's worth about $3. Here, the value is unknown. He asks how long his wife has been coughing. The old man is surprised. Merchants don't ask about other people's wives. They ask what else is available to trade. But he answers, 2 days, a dry cough, no blood. Daniel nods. He goes down to the basement. He takes out 2 strips of meat and a pinch of sage. He wraps the sage in a scrap of cloth. He comes back up. He puts everything on the counter. He explains. Soak the meat in hot water and serve it warm. Brew the sage separately and give it to her 3 times a day. The old man stares without blinking. Then he says the ring isn't worth that much. That he knows that. Daniel shrugs. He says the ring is beautiful. The stone is interesting. And if his wife feels better in 3 days, he'd be glad if the old man stopped by and let him know. The old man takes the meat, takes the bundle. His hands are shaking more than before. He turns toward the door, freezes. He calls over his shoulder that his name is Bart, that he lives in the 3rd house from the well, if Daniel needs anything, and he leaves. The door closes, the system flashes, the deal is done, Both parties are satisfied. The store's level is 1. And Daniel hears a sound. Quiet. Like a sigh. The wall to the left of the counter trembles. A crack running from floor to ceiling begins to close. The stone shifts as if alive. Dust falls from the ceiling. A minute later, the crack is gone. The wall stands smooth and solid, as if it had just been built. Daniel places the ring on the shelf, the first item in the display case. Price unknown, but it'll do for a start. He looks at his shop. The walls are a little sturdier. 1 customer a day. 1. Somewhere in a past life, he would have been fired for such results. But here, in a dead city, under a greenish sky, where creatures he's never seen before howl beyond the walls, 1 customer is a start. The morning of the second day began with rain. Drops pounded against the stone walls and ran down the window opening, which had no glass. Daniel woke up wet. Water had pooled by his head while he slept. He got up, wiped his face with his sleeve, looked at the ceiling. There were fewer cracks after yesterday's deal, but the holes remained. 3 of them. Water was dripping through the largest one, right onto the spot where he had slept. He moved his rag bed to the far wall, checked the basement. Dry. The stone kept the moisture out. Good news. The supplies were fine. The meat had decreased by 2 portions after yesterday's deal. 6 remained. The sage was down by 1 portion as well. 11. The salt was untouched. The system displayed all of this accurately. Every unit, every change. Daniel caught himself thinking that the system worked better than the accounting program at his old store on 4th. That one constantly froze on Tuesdays. He went upstairs. The rain had let up. Through the gaps in the clouds, light was breaking through. Greenish, like yesterday. Daniel stepped outside for the first time since waking up in this world. He stepped onto the street. Under his feet was stone, the old pavement, now cracked and overgrown with something gray. Not grass, something else, hard and brittle. He looked around. The street stretched in both directions. On the left, the houses stood closer together, low, 1 story, without roofs or with collapsed roofs. To the right, the street widened and led to what had once been a square. A well was visible there, a stone circle with a crossbar. There was no rope. People were bustling around the well. 3 figures, maybe 4. From a distance, he couldn't make out their faces, but they were moving, alive. Daniel returned to the store. The system gave him a prompt when he crossed the threshold. Store territory. Security zone active. 4-meter radius from the walls. Violence within the zone is impossible. 4 meters. Not much, but enough for a person to enter without fear of being stabbed in the back. Daniel stood behind the counter until noon. No one came. He spent his time productively. He wiped down the shelves a second time. He arranged the remaining stock according to the rules he knew by heart. Perishables closer to the exit. Sage at eye level. Meat below. Salt on a separate shelf. Salt has a special status. He realized this when the system marked it as a top-tier commodity. 500 grams of salt in this world was worth more than everything else in the store put together. He wouldn't sell the salt until he understood the market. Basic rule. Don't put goods out until you know their real price. Bart came by in the afternoon. The old man looked different. Yesterday he had been gray and stooped. Today he was still gray, but stood a little straighter. He said his wife had drunk some sage tea that morning. The cough hadn't gone away, but she felt better. She'd eaten some meat. It was the first time in 3 days she'd had a hot meal. Daniel nodded and asked about the town. Bart looked at him in surprise. Then he sat down on the floor by the counter and began to tell his story. Lowfield had once been a crossroads of trade routes. 8,000 residents, a market, taverns, a blacksmith, even a small school of magic. Then the long night happened. That's what they called the catastrophe here. The sky cracked. Creatures poured out of the fissures. 3/4 of the people died in a single night. 11 years have passed since then. 100 people remain in Lowfield, maybe fewer. Bart hadn't counted in a long time. People lived in the ruins. They foraged for food in the wastelands, hunted small creatures, gathered roots. Sometimes caravans passed through the town. Rarely. Once every 2 or 3 months. Then they could trade something for salt or bullets. Bullets. Daniel asked what the bullets were for. Bart explained. Pre-war weapons. Firearms. They work without magic. They're highly valued because, to the creatures, it doesn't matter if you're magic or a bullet. A bullet is simpler. Daniel remembered. Bullets are currency. Salt is currency. Mana crystals are currency. Clean water is currency. Gold is trash. He asked who was in charge of the city. Bart smirked. He said there was no one in charge. There are the 3 Fists, 3 men who were once mercenaries and now control the western part of the city. They have weapons. They have people. They take a cut from everyone who hunts in the wasteland. Those who don't pay don't hunt. Those who don't hunt don't eat. A simple system. Daniel asked if they took a cut from merchants. Bart laughed, a dry, short laugh. He said there hadn't been any merchants in Lowfield since the Rift. What's the point of taking a cut from something that doesn't exist? Then he looked at Daniel and said that now there was one merchant, and that the 3 Fists would find out soon enough. Daniel nodded. He'd expected that. Every neighborhood has its own 3 Fists. In Tacoma, they were called the Moreno brothers, and ran 2 car washes and a tobacco shop across the street from his store. Daniel didn't pay them back then. He made a deal. He offered them a discount on coffee and cigarettes in exchange for them keeping an eye on the parking lot at night. The brothers agreed. A year later, they were his most loyal customers and personally chased away 2 thieves who tried to break into the cash register. It's not a question of whether to pay or not. It's a question of what you offer in return. Bart left toward evening. Daniel gave him another batch of sage for his wife. For free. Bart tried to refuse. Daniel said it was a sample, that any good store gives out samples to keep the customer coming back. Bart didn't understand, but took it. The system didn't register the transaction. A sample didn't count as a sale. Daniel noted that, too. Day 3. The morning was clear. The green in the sky had faded, or maybe he was just getting used to it. Daniel stood behind the counter and waited. Around noon, the door opened. A young woman walked in. Her dark hair was pulled back into a bun. Her face was thin. Her cheekbones were sharp. Her clothes were clean. Not new, but clean. This was noticeable because cleanliness in this world was a luxury. Behind her stood a girl, 13 or 14 years old. She was clinging to the older woman. Her eyes were large and wary. The woman approached the counter. Her hands were trembling. Barely noticeable, but Daniel saw it. He always noticed the hands first. Hands speak louder than a face. She took out a locket, silver, old, with fine engraving. The chain was broken and tied in a knot. The woman placed it on the counter and said she needed something for her cough. Daniel looked at the locket. Silver wasn't worth much in the post-apocalypse, but this piece was old. Pre-war. Maybe 100 years old. The engraving was delicate, handmade. They don't sell things like that. Things like this are passed down. He looked at the woman, at her hands, at the way she'd placed the locket on the counter. Quickly, without looking, as if she were afraid of changing her mind. Then he watched as she instinctively moved her hand back toward the locket. A centimeter. Her fingers twitched and froze. He looked at the girl behind her. The girl coughed, quietly. hiding her mouth in her palm. He looked at their shoes. The dust on their boots was darker than the local dust, reddish, clay-colored. The eastern quarter, if Bart's description was to be believed. A 3-hour walk. They had walked 3 hours to trade a family locket for cough medicine. Daniel gently pushed the locket back toward the woman, told her to put it away, that he wouldn't take it. The woman flinched. Her chin twitched. She decided she was being refused. Her eyes grew moist, but she didn't cry. She just clenched her jaw and reached for the locket to take it and leave. Daniel raised his hand. He asked her to wait. He went down to the basement. He got out the sage. He broke off half a portion, wrapped it in a piece of clean cloth he'd found that morning among the trash and washed in rainwater. He came back up, placed the bundle on the counter, explained. Pour boiling water over it. Let it steep for 10 minutes. Give the girl the warm tea 3 times a day. The woman looked at the bundle, then at Daniel, then back at the bundle. She asked how much. Daniel said that in exchange, she would tell him what was happening in the eastern quarter, who lived there, who was in charge, what resources were available, and that in 3 days she would come back and tell him if it had helped. The woman was silent. Then her face changed. Something in it eased. The tension she had carried for so long that she no longer noticed it suddenly became visible, precisely because it was beginning to fade. She began to cry. Quickly, quietly. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She apologized. Daniel said there was no need to apologize. Her name was Kim Min-soo. The girl behind her was named Hana, her sister, the younger one. Their parents had died in the first year after the rift. Since then, Min-soo had been raising Hana on her own. She was 24. She looked 30. About 30 people lived in the eastern quarter. The eldest was a former blacksmith named Grawl. Not evil, not kind, practical. He kept the quarter in order as best he could. There wasn't enough food, or water. The well in the eastern part had become brackish 6 months ago, and since then they'd been going to the central one, every day. 3 hours there, 3 hours back. Min-soo spoke for 20 minutes. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He memorized. 30 people in the eastern quarter. A salted-up well. The blacksmith, Grawl. A shortage of water. A shortage of food. A long road to resources. It was more than information. It was a map. The first map of his new world. When Min-soo finished, she asked why he needed all this. Daniel said he was a merchant. That a merchant who doesn't know his customers isn't a merchant, but a blind man with a cash register. Min-soo didn't understand the word cash register, but got the gist. She took the bundle, called for Hana, headed for the door, stopped, turned around. She asked if it was true that he had more goods. Daniel said there wasn't much yet, but there would be more. Min-soo nodded. She said she would be back in 3 days. She left. Hana turned at the threshold and looked at Daniel. Big eyes, serious. Then she smiled. Quickly, as if she'd stolen that smile and was afraid it would be taken away. The door closed. The system flashed. The deal was done. Information about the eastern quarter in exchange for half a portion. Both sides satisfied. Store level. 2. And in the corner of the store, behind the counter, there was movement. Daniel turned. The wall arched. The stone shifted. 3 small boxes slid out of the wall. Wooden, with neat lids. A pharmacy shelf. The first in Lowfield. Daniel walked over. He opened the first box. Inside lay dried herbs he didn't recognize. The system prompted him. Fire flower root, fever reducer. Second box. Ground gray tree bark, painkiller. Third. Powder from the wings of the moon moth, antiseptic. 3 basic medicines, appeared out of nowhere, grown by the wall, gifted by the system. Daniel stood in front of the pharmacy shelf and looked at the 3 little boxes. His inventory had just doubled, in a single transaction, in a single fair exchange. He understood the rule. The system doesn't just count. The system builds. Every fair transaction adds to the store it didn't have before. A wall, a shelf, merchandise, a resource. And the fairer the deal, the greater the reward. The silver medallion was worth 10 times more than a pinch of sage. But Daniel didn't take the medallion. He took the information and received an entire pharmacy shelf. The system rewarded him not for the profit, but for the decision, for seeing a person, not a coin. He stood in his little shop. The walls were sturdier than yesterday's. The ceiling was still full of holes. The door was still warped. But in the corner stood a pharmacy shelf with real medicine, and 2 customers knew their way here. 2. In 3 days. In a dead city at the edge of the world. He sat down behind the counter. He took out the ring Bart had left behind. He twirled it between his fingers. Then he placed it on the middle shelf at eye level. Next to it, he laid out a strip of meat and a bundle of sage. 3 items on display, plus 3 little boxes of medicine. 6 items. For a second-tier store in a post-apocalyptic world, that was an assortment. Not a rich one, but honest. Daniel looked at the sign. Store. 1 word. No name, no logo, no slogan. He thought he'd come up with a name later, when there was someone to call it that for. For now, a single word was enough. Store. Open. Minsu returned 3 days later, as promised. Hana wasn't coughing anymore. The sage had helped. Minsu stood in the doorway, shifting uneasily. Daniel could tell she hadn't come just to report. She'd come with a question. People who hesitate on the threshold always come with a question. He waited. He didn't rush her. Minsu asked if you needed help in the store. She knows how to count. She knows how to sort things. She knows how to talk to people. She wants to work. Daniel asked what she wanted in return for the work. Minsu said that food for Hana would be enough, and a roof over her head, if there was one. Daniel thought for 3 seconds. In his old life, he would have hired an intern at minimum wage and sent them for training. Here, there were no wages. No training either. But someone who knows the locals and can do math isn't an intern. She's a sales floor manager. He said he'd take her on, that Hana could live in the basement while there were holes in the ceiling upstairs. The basement is dry and warm. Minsu works on the sales floor from morning until noon. She's free in the afternoon. Food from the store's stock twice a day for both of them. Minsu nodded. Briefly, businesslike. But her eyes were shining. She brought Hana in. The girl walked in and immediately looked at the shelves, then at the counter, then at the medicine boxes, and said the meat was stacked unevenly. Daniel looked. The meat really was stacked crookedly. He'd laid it out that morning in a hurry. Hana walked over and straightened the row, neatly, exactly along the edge of the shelf. Then she stepped back and surveyed the result with the seriousness of a surgeon. Daniel looked at Minsu. Minsu shrugged and said her sister liked things in order. Daniel thought Hana was a natural merchandiser. That word didn't exist here, but the meaning was the same. Minsu's first day on the job began with an inventory. Daniel explained the system to her. Every item is recorded: quantity, category, date received, expected expiration date, minimum exchange rate. Minsu listened carefully, nodded, asked for clarification. An hour later, she knew the entire inventory. 6 items. It wasn't difficult, but Daniel explained that there were 6 items now. In a month, there would be 60. In 6 months, 600. She had to be ready. Minsu said she was ready. There was something new. Not hope, certainty. During her first week on the job, Minsu had 4 more customers. A middle-aged woman traded a coil of coarse rope for 2 portions of dried meat. A man with a lame leg brought 3 mana crystals, small, dull, almost drained, but the system rated them as medium-grade trade goods. Daniel gave him a painkiller made from gray tree bark and a portion of meat. The third was a teenager, skinny, quick, with shifty eyes. He brought a knife, rusty but serviceable. He wanted salt. Daniel gave him a pinch, a small one. The teenager looked at the pinch and said the knife was worth more. Daniel agreed. He said the knife was worth more, but that he'd take the knife at the current price, and if the teenager came back in a week with something else to trade, he'd get the difference, like a credit. The teenager didn't understand the word credit. Daniel explained it more simply. He said that the store keeps track of debts, and that a debt in the customer's favor is a good thing. The teenager left with the salt and the look of someone who, for the first time, hadn't been shortchanged. The 4th customer was an old woman, quite frail. She had nothing to trade. She just came in to look around. She stood by the entrance. She touched the walls. Then she said she remembered this store, that it used to be here, a long time ago, before the rift, even before that. Daniel froze. He asked what she remembered. The old woman said that when she was little, her grandmother used to bring her here, to the store, right here. They sold everything here: food, tools, medicine, fabrics. The store was big, bigger than it is now, 2 stories, with a turret, and the owner was strange, quiet, polite, a foreigner. He spoke with an accent, but his goods were the best in town. Daniel asked what the owner's name was. The old woman shook her head. She didn't remember. It had been a long time, 50 years, maybe more. Then the owner disappeared. The store closed, and then the long night came. The old woman looked at Daniel, at his face, at his hands. Then she said he looked like him. Not on the outside, in some other way. And she left. The system didn't register a transaction. The old woman hadn't bought anything or sold anything, but Daniel had received something more valuable than any merchandise. Confirmation. The store had been here before. A different owner, a foreigner with an accent. He'd worked there before the rift. Then he disappeared, and the world fell apart. Whether it was a coincidence or not, Daniel didn't know yet, but he committed it to memory. By the end of the first week, the system showed 10 transactions. The store's walls had become entirely stone, not a single crack. The holes in the ceiling had closed up, the floor had leveled out. Inside, it was dry and warm even without a fire, as if the stone itself maintained the temperature. Minsu noticed it first. She said it was warmer inside the store than outside, by 5 degrees, maybe 10. Daniel checked. She was right. 10 transactions, stone walls, a warm floor, a dry ceiling, 2 employees. The inventory had grown to 12 items. The system added a few items after each transaction. Not always, not after every one, but after particularly successful ones. A coil of thin rope appeared, 3 clay bowls, a bar of soap, real soap. Minsu saw the soap and stared at it for a minute without looking away. Then she asked if she could use it. Daniel said the soap was for sale, but he cut her a small piece from the end, just enough for 2 or 3 washes. He said it was a work bonus. Minsu took the piece and went down to the basement. Half an hour later, she returned. Her hair was wet. Her face was clean. She was smiling. Not widely, just the corner of her mouth. But it was the first smile Daniel had ever seen on her face. Hannah had washed up too. She came out of the basement with shiny hair and a serious expression. She walked over to the soap shelf and adjusted it, a little to the left, by a millimeter. Then she nodded to herself. That evening, Daniel sat behind the counter. Minsu and Hannah were sleeping in the basement. The store was quiet, warm. The scent of soap mingled with the scent of dried herbs. The system glowed with a soft blue light in the corner of his vision. 10 transactions, level 5. Everything was moving slowly, just right, as it should. On the morning of the 9th day, Daniel woke up to a sound he hadn't heard before. Heavy footsteps, several pairs, getting closer. Minsu was already up, standing by the window, her face tense. She turned to Daniel and said one word. Fists. 3 figures appeared in the doorway. The first was as broad as a wardrobe, bald, with a scar across his eyebrow. The second was thinner but sinewy, with a knife on his belt. The third was the shortest, but a barrel was sticking out from behind his back, a real firearm. The first one stepped inside. He looked around, at the walls, at the shelves, at the merchandise, at Minsu, at Daniel, and said he'd heard someone had opened a shop here and forgot to introduce himself. Daniel stood behind the counter, hands on the countertop, open, not clenched. He looked at Baldy, taking him in. Military boots, worn but sturdy, leather jacket, patched in 3 places. The scar on his eyebrow was old, at least 5 years. Vani's knife was a good one, recently sharpened. The third man's gun hangs low, means it's heavy, means he's got bullets. People who carry empty weapons hang them higher. 3 armed men in his store. In his old life, he would have called the police. There was no police here. But there were stone walls, and the system. Daniel smiled, not broadly, professionally, with the same smile he used to greet audits from headquarters. And he said, welcome, that the store was open, that his name was Daniel and he was the owner. And he asked how he could help. The bald man hadn't expected that tone. He'd expected fear, or aggression, or at least nervousness. Daniel gave him none of that. The bald man hesitated. Then he said that in Lowfield, everyone paid the 3 fists for protection, 10% of the proceeds. Daniel asked, what proceeds? He trades on a barter basis. He has no money. 10% of what? The bald man frowned. Apparently, no one had ever asked follow-up questions before. He said 10% of the goods. Daniel nodded. He asked what the 3 fists gave in return. The bald man said protection. Daniel asked from whom? The bald man said, from everyone. Daniel looked at the stone walls, which this morning were slightly thicker than yesterday. He looked at the system, which was quietly flashing in the corner of his vision. Violence in the store area was impossible. Then he looked at the bald man and said he understood, that protection is important, that he values safety. And he offered something else, not a cut of the merchandise, but a shopping privilege. The 3 fists would get the right to shop in the store first, before the other customers. At the same prices, no markup, but first. Bald man was silent. He didn't understand. Daniel explained it more simply. He said that when medicine or weapons or ammunition arrived at the store, the 3 fists would be the first to know, before anyone else. And they would buy before anyone else, if they wanted to. And goods in this world run out quickly. First come, first served. Bald man thought. The wiry man next to him shifted from foot to foot. The third man, with a rifle slung behind his back, coughed. The bald man looked at the shelves. He saw soap. He saw medicine in little boxes. He saw rope. Then he looked at Daniel and asked what if he just took what he wanted, right now. Daniel didn't flinch. He'd been waiting for that question. Every racketeer asks it. Every single one. Daniel said he could try. The bald man stepped toward the shelf. He reached for the soap and stopped. His hand froze in midair, as if it had hit a wall that wasn't there. He jerked his hand back. Nothing. His fingers wouldn't move any further. An invisible barrier. The system wouldn't let him through. The bald man pulled his hand back. He looked at his palm, then at Daniel. There was something new in his eyes. Not fear. Caution. Daniel said that the store protects its merchandise and its employees and its customers. That he's not opposed to cooperation, but only if it's voluntary. The bald man stood silently. 10 seconds. 20. Then he turned to his men and nodded toward the exit. The wiry one and the third man left. The bald man paused at the threshold. He turned around. He said his name was Cain, that they would talk some more, and he left. The door closed. Minsu stood against the wall, pale, her hands clasped in front of her. She counted aloud, barely audible. 1, 2, 3, 4. A habit that betrayed her nervousness. She asked Daniel what that was about, why Cain couldn't take the soap. Daniel said the store doesn't allow violence or theft, only honest transactions. Minsu looked at the walls, at the ceiling, at the floor, then at Daniel, and asked who he was. Daniel shrugged. He said he was the manager. Minsu didn't understand the word, but didn't ask again. Cain returned 2 days later, alone, without Gory and the third. No weapons in sight, though Daniel knew a knife was hidden under his jacket because the fabric was bulging on the right side. Cain walked in, stopped at the counter, placed 4 bullets on the countertop, large caliber. The copper casings glinted dully in the light from the window. He said he wanted painkillers, his back, an old wound, it hurts at night. Daniel looked at the bullets, 4 of them. The system assessed them instantly, highest exchange category. 1 bullet was worth 5 servings of meat. 4 bullets for a single dose of painkiller? That was twice as much as needed. Daniel could have taken all 4, and Cain wouldn't have argued. He didn't. He pushed 2 bullets back toward Cain. He took 2. He took some gray tree bark out of the medicine box. He measured out a double portion. He explained how to brew it, morning and evening, no more than twice a day. An overdose wouldn't kill him, but it would make him sick. Cain took the bundle. He looked at the 2 cartridges Daniel had returned, then at Daniel, with a long, heavy gaze. He said he didn't understand him. Every dealer Cain knew would have taken all 4. Daniel said he was charging a fair price, and that Cain now knew how much the painkiller cost. 2 cartridges for a double dose. When his back hurt again, he'd come back and pay the same amount. No more, no less. Predictability. In this world where every deal was a game of blind chance, predictability was worth more than gold. Cain took the extra cartridges, took the medicine, turned toward the exit, stopped at the threshold, didn't turn around, said that the rat gang from the northern quarter had been moving toward the center over the past week. 7 men, poorly armed but cocky. If they came near the store, it would get noisy. Then he left. Daniel stood behind the counter, processing it all. Cain had just given him intelligence. For free. Not out of kindness, out of calculation. A store with painkillers was useful to him. A store looted by the rats was a loss to him. Cain was protecting his own interests, and it was a fair deal. The system flashed. The transaction was complete. But a new line appeared next to it. Reputation. Neutral faction. 3 fists. Status. Cautious cooperation. Daniel smiled. In corporate terminology, this was called a B2B contact. 2 rounds lay on the shelf. The first ammunition in his inventory. Daniel didn't know what kind of gun they fit. He didn't know the caliber. He knew nothing about local weapons. But the rounds were currency, and he kept them as he would keep $100 bills, in a safe place and in plain sight. Because the client needs to know you have valuable goods. Otherwise, why come at all? The 4th day of the 2nd week brought a new customer, a hunter, a young guy in his 20s with a long scar across his cheek and a rough leather bag slung over his shoulder. He walked in quickly. He looked around. He saw the medicine shelf. He walked over. He said he needed antiseptic. He'd cut himself while hunting. The wound was clean, but had started to turn red. Daniel looked at the wound. Forearm, a long cut. Not deep, but inflamed. The edges were red. Another day without treatment, and it would start to fester. He took out some powder made from the wings of a moon moth. He explained how to apply it. A thin layer on the clean wound. Change the bandage morning and evening. The hunter asked the price. Daniel asked what he had. The hunter opened the bag. Inside lay 3 small carcasses. The creatures resembled rabbits, but had 6 legs and short horns. The meat of these creatures, not tainted, common wasteland mutants, edible if cooked properly. Daniel took 1 carcass. The system assessed it. Meat of a horned hare mutant. Edible. Requires heat treatment. Nutritional value? Average. Exchange value? Low. 1 carcass for an antiseptic. Fair. The hunter took the medicine. He pulled something else out of his bag. A small crystal. Dirty. Dull. He said he found it in the ruins while hunting. He doesn't know what it is. Maybe it's worth something. Daniel took the crystal. The system identified it instantly. A mana crystal. 12% charge. Low, but alive. Even 12% mana is a resource. In the pre-war world, that would have been enough to light a lamp for half an hour. Now it's enough to. The system added a line. Connecting the crystal to the trading point is possible. Effect, room lighting. Duration, continuous at minimum consumption. Daniel asked the hunter how much he wanted for the crystal. The hunter shrugged, said he had no idea. Maybe it's worth nothing. Daniel could have agreed, taken the crystal for next to nothing. The hunter wouldn't even have known he'd been cheated. But the system knew, and Daniel knew. He offered 3 portions of jerky for the crystal. The hunter looked surprised. 3 portions is 2 days' worth of food for 1 person. For a dirty little stone. He agreed instantly. He left with the antiseptic and the meat. Happy. Daniel inserted the crystal into a recess on the counter that he hadn't noticed before. A small indentation in the wood, as if it had been waiting. The crystal clicked quietly into place, and the shop lit up. A soft light. Warm, like an incandescent bulb. Not bright, but enough to see every corner. Minsu came up from the basement. She stopped. She shielded her eyes with her axe. Then she removed her hand and stared at the light for a minute without moving. Hana followed her up. She saw the light and froze on the stairs. Then she smiled slowly. Not a quick, stolen smile like last time, but a real one. A broad one. Light was a rarity in Lowfield. People went to bed at sunset and rose at dawn. Fire was dangerous because it attracted creatures. Candles had run out years ago. Oil lamps worked, but oil was expensive and stank. And here was soft light without fire, without smoke, without smell. The news spread in a day. In the evening, people approached the store. 5 people. They stood outside. They looked at the windows from which light was streaming. Silently, as if they were remembering something. Daniel stepped out onto the threshold. He looked at them. Then he said that the store was open until sunset, but if anyone needed to warm up, they could come in. 2 came in. They stood inside for a while. They touched the warm walls. Then they left. No sales were made. But the system recorded something new. Fame. Level 1. The shop had been noticed. The following days were busy. Customers came, not in a crowd, 1 or 2 a day, but steadily. The hunter returned with a companion. They brought more carcasses and 2 crystals. One was nearly dead. The second had a 30% charge. Daniel inserted the second crystal, and the light grew brighter. The woman with the rope returned. She brought fabric, rough but intact. Daniel traded it for medicine for her mother. Bart came every other day. Not always with goods, sometimes just to sit, to share what he'd heard around town. Daniel didn't turn him away. In retail, there's a concept called foot traffic. People who just drop by increase foot traffic. Foot traffic attracts customers. Bart was free advertising. By the end of the second week, the system showed 23 transactions. The store's level was 8. The space had expanded. Daniel didn't notice right away. In the morning he woke up and the wall behind the counter was a meter farther away than yesterday. It had simply moved back. The sales floor area had grown from 40 to 55 square meters. There were more shelves. 2 new racks had sprouted from the wall like branches from a tree. On them lay goods that Daniel hadn't put there. The system had provided them. 3 rolls of bandages, a bottle of clean water, sealed, glass, like from a pharmacy, a small hammer with a wooden handle, and a notebook, blank, with a pencil. Daniel picked up the notebook, opened it. Blank pages. The paper was thick, yellowish. It smelled of old wood. He looked at the pencil, an ordinary graphite one, sharpened. He began to write. First entry. Date. Approximate. He had been counting the days since waking up. 14. 2 weeks. Inventory. 32 items. Clients. 9 regulars. Of those, Bart and Minso daily. Staff. Minsu, assistant. Hana, a merchandiser, or rather, an intern. He wrote and, for the first time in 2 weeks, felt at home. Not at home. Not safe. Not comfortable. At home. As if his hands had finally found the lever they'd been searching for. Minsu peered over his shoulder. She asked what he was writing. He said he was keeping records. Minsu nodded and said his handwriting looked like a chicken's. Daniel didn't argue. That evening he sat on the roof. The roof was new. Just a week ago he wouldn't have been able to climb up there. The ceiling had been unstable. Now the stone was solid and flat. You could sit on it. He looked down at Lowfield from above. The dead city was beginning to stir. There were more people by the well than on the first day. Someone had stretched a canopy between 2 buildings, a makeshift shelter. 3 women were washing clothes in a basin. Children were running around the square. 2 children. He hadn't seen any children before, so they'd been hiding them. So there had been someone to hide them from, and now someone had decided it was safe to let the children out into the square. A small change, but Daniel knew that small changes add up to big ones. Every store starts with its first customer. Every neighborhood starts with the first child on the street. Downstairs in the store, a light was on, soft and warm, the only light in Lowfield. He could see it from anywhere in the city. On the 16th day, Ashley Reed walked through the door. Daniel would later recall that moment as the point after which everything accelerated. She was tall, a head taller than Minsaw, red hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, a tattoo on her neck, lines, geometric, resembling runes or a number, combat gear, leather gauntlets, boots with metal studs, a knife in a sheath on her hip, long, a short sword on her back. She walked in and immediately scanned the room, not like a customer, like someone looking for exits and assessing hiding spots. Her eyes swept over the walls, the shelves, the merchandise. Min-Soo standing behind the counter, Daniel standing next to her. Then she looked at the door to the basement, and at the window. 2 entrances, 2 exits. She memorized them in a second and a half. Daniel memorized her in 3. Boots, expensive ones, worn but well-maintained. Anyone who takes care of their shoes in a post-apocalyptic world knows the value of things. The cuffs are scratched, on the outside, means she blocks blows, means she's a fighter. A knife hangs on her left hip, left-handed or ambidextrous. A short sword on her back, not on her belt, means she's used to pulling it out with a quick motion over her shoulder, means fights start suddenly. Eyes, gray, cold, lifeless. The eyes of someone who hasn't had a reason to smile in a long time. But not angry, empty. That's what was scary. She walked up to the counter, placed her hands on the countertop. The knife stayed in its sheath. She looked at Daniel and said she'd come for the store's contents. All of them. Min-Soo tensed. She took a step back. Her hand reached for the edge of the shelf behind which she could hide. Daniel didn't move. He looked at Ashley and thought. She had come alone. Robbers don't come alone to a store where 3 people live, unless they're sure they can handle it, or if they don't care, or if they aren't really robbers. Daniel asked if she wanted coffee. Ashley blinked, for the first time since she'd been standing at the counter. She'd expected anything, a scream, pleas, attempts to bargain, maybe even an attack, but not an offer of coffee. Daniel pulled a tin can from under the counter. The system had added it 3 days ago after a particularly successful trade with a caravan driver who was passing through the outskirts and exchanged a sack of grain for a full set of bandages. The can contained coffee. Real coffee. Ground. Sealed. Daniel didn't know where the system had gotten it. Maybe from pre-war stockpiles. Maybe from another dimension. He didn't care. Coffee smelled like coffee. And in a world where people had forgotten the taste of a hot drink, that smell was worth more than a weapon. He boiled water on a small stove that had appeared in the corner of the store on the 12th deal. He poured coffee into a clay mug, poured in the water, set it in front of Ashley. The aroma wafted through the room. Min-Soo, behind him, sniffed the air. Hana poked her head out of the basement. Ashley looked at the mug, then at Daniel, then back at the mug. She didn't move for 20 seconds. Daniel waited. Then Ashley took the mug, with both hands, brought it to her face. She closed her eyes. She inhaled, and something in her face changed. It didn't soften. It didn't warm up. Just the emptiness was replaced for a second by something alive. A memory, perhaps, or the shadow of the person she was before the world fell apart. She took a sip. A slow one. Then she opened her eyes. She looked at Daniel and asked why. Daniel said she looked like someone who hadn't been offered coffee in a long time. And he was a manager. It was his job to know what a customer needed. Ashley said she wasn't a customer, that she'd come to pick up her order. Daniel said he knew, and asked if it had been a while since she'd eaten. Ashley was silent. The answer was visible in her cheekbones. Sharp, bony, by the way the skin stretched over her wrists. by the way she held the mug tightly, as if it were the last thing in the world. Daniel took out some jerky. He placed it on the counter. 2 servings. He set a second mug of coffee next to it. Minsu, behind his back, counted quietly. 1, 2, 3. Daniel said he was offering a job. Store security. 2 meals a day, a roof over her head, coffee every morning, clean work, no one to kill. Just make sure no one kills anyone here. Ashley finished her coffee, set down the mug, looked at the meat, then at Daniel, and asked what if she took the meat and the coffee and still took over the store. Daniel shrugged and said that then there wouldn't be any coffee tomorrow, because there'd be no one to make it. Ashley looked at him. He wasn't joking, and she could see that. He wasn't afraid, and she could see that too. Not because he was strong. He was definitely weaker than her physically, but because fear didn't factor into his decisions. He stood behind the counter and offered her a job, with the same expression he'd use in an office interview, as if the knife at her hip were just a round, and the sword behind his back was a briefcase with a resume. Ashley took the meat. She ate the first portion in 4 bites, quickly, like an animal, like someone who's used to eating fast because the food might be taken away. She ate the second portion more slowly. Daniel didn't comment. When she finished, she said she agreed, for a trial period. Daniel nodded. He said the trial period was 2 weeks. If she didn't like it, she could leave. No questions asked. She could take 5 portions of meat and a supply of painkillers with her, as severance pay. Ashley raised an eyebrow. She asked what severance pay was. Daniel explained. Ashley said it was the first time she'd heard of a robber being paid for not robbing. Daniel said she wasn't a robber. She was a candidate for the position of head of security. It was just that the interview had gone a bit unconventionally. Minso behind the counter stopped counting. She looked at Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read, somewhere between approval and alarm. Hannah came out of the basement. She looked at Ashley, at her height, at the knife, at the sword. Then she walked over to the shelf next to Ashley and straightened a bar of soap that had shifted. Ashley looked down at the girl. Hannah looked up at her and went back to the shelves. Ashley settled on the roof. She chose the spot herself, said you could see better from up there. Daniel didn't object. On the very first night, she discovered a weak spot. The back wall of the store was thinner than the others. The system hadn't had time to reinforce it yet. Ashley said that if the rat gang came, they'd climb in from there. Daniel asked how she knew about the rat gang. Ashley said she'd passed through their territory on the way here. They'd been watching her. They didn't attack. She alone was too valuable for their level. But the store was a different story. The store doesn't fight back. Daniel nodded. He asked how many of them there were. Ashley said 7, maybe 8, armed with knives and clubs, one with a crossbow, an old one that didn't work well. No serious weapons. But 7 against 1 guard is bad math. Daniel agreed, and said they needed to solve this problem before they solved it for him. Not by force, by logistics. In the morning, he asked Minsu to go see Bart and find out what the rats buy when the caravans come. Minsu returned an hour later. The rats buy food, only food. Salted meat, crackers, anything they can eat. They don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to gather. They only know how to take. But lately, there's been no one left to take from. People are bypassing their territory. The caravans aren't stopping. The rats are starving. A hungry gang is a dangerous gang, but also a manageable one. Daniel wrote a note, on a page from a new notebook, in neat handwriting, an appeal to the rats' gang leader, a proposal. The store is willing to trade food for services. The services are simple: patrolling the city's perimeter, guarding the roads from small vermin, escorting customers from the eastern quarter. For each day of patrolling, 2 portions of food per person, not on credit, not in advance, upon completion. A report to Ashley every evening. Ashley checks, Ashley decides. If the patrol is just for show, no food. If it's honest work, food is provided. He asked Bart to deliver a note. Bart said he wasn't a suicide mission, that the rats kill messengers. Daniel asked if they kill messengers who bring food. Bart thought for a moment. Daniel wrapped 3 portions of jerky in the note. Bart left. He returned 4 hours later, unharmed, gloomy, but unharmed. He said the leader had read it. He laughed. Then he stopped. Then he thought. Then he said he'd come himself, tomorrow, to take a look. Daniel nodded. He said he'd be waiting. Ashley on the roof heard the conversation. She went downstairs. She walked up to Daniel. She said he was inviting a gangster who wanted to rob him into the store. Daniel said he was inviting a hungry man to a place where there was food. A difference in wording, a difference in the result. Ashley was silent. Then she said he was either a genius or an idiot, and that she hoped to figure it out before they got killed. The system flashed in her peripheral vision. Store staff updated. Minsu, assistant, specialization, customer service. Hana, intern, specialization, merchandising. Ashley, security guard, specialization, security and perimeter. Daniel looked at his team, a 24-year-old exhausted older sister, a 14-year-old silent girl with a mania for order, a 27-year-old mercenary who came to rob him. 3 employees, not a single one with retail experience. In his former life, HR would have fired him for such hiring decisions. But in his former life, he didn't have a store that thrived on honest deals in a world where honesty is considered a weakness. That evening, Hana brought him a mug of coffee. He hadn't asked for it. She simply set it down next to his notebook and left. The coffee was hot, sweet. Hana had found honey in one of the boxes the system had added that morning and decided that coffee with honey was better than just coffee. She was right. The leader of the Rats gang arrived the next morning. His name was Ferg. Short, broad-shouldered, his face was weathered and covered in fine scars, as if someone had scattered a handful of broken glass across it and forgotten to clean it up. His left eye was cloudy. He couldn't see out of it. His right eye made up for it. Quick. Sharp. He came in alone, just as he'd promised. But Ashley saw 2 of them from the roof, standing by the alley across the street. Back up. Smart move. Ferg stopped at the counter. He looked at Daniel, then at the shelves, then at the little pharmacy boxes, at the light from the crystal, at the soap, at the bandages, at the notebook next to the pencil, then at Daniel again, and said the note was funny. Daniel said he wasn't joking. Ferg said that was exactly why it was funny, that no one in their right mind offers gangsters a job, that you offer gangsters money to make them go away, or a bullet so they don't come, but you don't offer them a job, because gangsters don't work. Daniel asked why. Ferg opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, said because they're gangsters. Daniel nodded, and asked how long it had been since his men had eaten their fill. Ferg was silent. The answer was on his face, on his sunken cheeks, in the way he involuntarily glanced at the dried meat on the shelf. A quick glance, a hungry one, immediately averted, but Daniel saw it. Daniel said the offer was simple. His men would patrol the roads, drive away small-time thugs, make sure the store's customers got there safely. Every evening, Ashley takes the report. If the job is done, food is handed out. If not, then not. No advances, no debts. A fair exchange. Ferg asked what if his men decided it was easier to take the food by force. Daniel looked at the walls. Ferg followed his gaze. Stone. Smooth. Not a single crack. Warm to the touch. And thick. Daniel said they'd already tried to break through the walls. Kane, from Three Fists, could tell him how it went. Ferg narrowed his good eye. He asked what Kane had to do with it. Daniel said that Kane was a customer at the store, a regular. He bought painkillers, and that if the rats attacked the store, Kane would lose his only source of medicine for his back. And Kane wasn't the kind of man who forgave losses. Ferg was silent. He was thinking. Daniel could see the thought process behind that cloudy eye. Ferg wasn't stupid. He was hungry and cruel, but not stupid, and he saw the trap. Not a physical one, an economic one. The store had already built up connections. Kane, the hunters, the residents of the East Quarter. Attacking the store meant more than just robbing a shop. It meant making enemies among those who depended on that shop, and there were more of them every day. Ferg said he'd think about it. Daniel said the food was waiting, but not forever. Ferg left. The next day, 2 of his men stood on the road between the East Quarter and downtown, with clubs. Gloomy, but they stood. That evening, Ashley checked. She confirmed the road was clear. Not a single creature on the trail. Daniel handed out 4 portions of meat, 2 per person. 2 rats took the food and left in silence. On the 3rd day, 4 were on patrol. By the 5th, all 7. Ferg didn't come in person, but his men were working. Minso was the first to notice the change. She said 3 new customers had come from the Eastern Quarter. Before, they were afraid of the road. Now the road is guarded. People are coming. Daniel nodded. The network was working. Security creates safety. Security creates traffic. Traffic creates sales. Sales strengthen the store. The store pays for security. The circle was complete. On the 23rd day, what Daniel had been waiting for and fearing happened. He went down to the basement in the morning as usual, to check the stock, to take inventory, and he discovered that the basement had gotten bigger. The wall at the far end had shifted. Behind it, a new room had opened up. Small, 3 by 4 meters, with a low ceiling, with stone walls that were colder than the rest of the basement. Significantly colder. Daniel stepped inside and felt the air change. Cool, clean, dry, like in a refrigerator. The system confirmed it. The magical cooling chamber is activated. Temperature, 4 degrees Celsius. Constant. Suitable for storing perishable goods. A refrigerator. He had a refrigerator. In a world where food went bad in 2 days and people were killed over a can of salted meat, he had a room where meat could be stored for weeks. He stood in the cold room and breathed. Steam came out of his mouth. He smiled. For the first time in 23 days, he smiled genuinely. Not a manager's professional smile, just a simple one. Like a man who'd been given what he wanted, but hadn't dared to ask for. He went upstairs and told Minsu they needed meat. Lots of it. Fresh. The hunters who came to trade in the carcasses of horned hares brought 3 or 4 at a time. Daniel offered them a new deal. A standing order. 10 carcasses a week. A fixed price. Antiseptic plus bandages plus 2 portions of dried sage for each shipment. The hunters exchanged glances. 10 carcasses meant 2 full days of hunting, but medicine and bandages out on the wasteland were a matter of life and death. One bad cut without antiseptic meant infection. Infection meant fever. Fever without a doctor meant death. They agreed. The first batch arrived 3 days later. Daniel put the meat in the cold room. He arranged it on the shelves. He labeled it. Date received, estimated expiration date, order of use. First in, first out. FIFO. He said the word out loud, and Minsu asked what it meant. Daniel explained. First in, first out. What comes in first goes out first, so nothing goes to waste. Minsu nodded and said it made sense. That in the Eastern District, Growl did the opposite. They ate the new stuff first. The old stuff rotted. Half the stock went to waste. Daniel wasn't surprised. People without a system lose 30% of their resources. It was true in Seattle, and it was true here. The 30th day. A month. The system showed 50 transactions. The store's level was 12. And on the morning of the 30th day, Daniel heard the sound of water. Not from outside, from inside. A square opening appeared in the floor behind the counter. A stone cylinder rose from it. A well. An indoor well. The water at the bottom glistened, clear and still. The system confirmed it. Indoor source activated. Water. Clean. Renewable supply. 20 liters per day. Daniel scooped some up with his hand. Cold, clear, odorless, tasteless. Pure water. In a world where people walked 3 hours to a well and fought over murky sludge, a spring of pure water flowed in his store. 20 liters a day. It wasn't enough for the town, but it was enough for the store and his people. And for the customers. He stepped out onto the porch. He looked out onto the street. 2 children were running around the well. Women were doing laundry. A hunter was carrying a sack. Ferga patrolmen stood at the intersection. Lowfield was alive. Slowly. Cautiously. But alive. Daniel went back inside and added a new line to the board he'd hung up in place of the price list. Clean water, 1 mug, free for every customer. Minso read it and asked if it wasn't too generous. 20 liters a day, that's 40 mugs. If 40 people come, there won't be any water left for them. Daniel said that if 40 people came a day, the shop would rise 3 levels in a week, and the system would give them a bigger source. Generosity isn't an expense. Generosity is an investment. Minsu shook her head, but she didn't argue. She was starting to get used to his logic. She didn't agree, but she was getting used to it. That same evening, Daniel sat in the basement with his notebook, drawing up a plan for the coming month. Bullet points. Expand the product range. Establish a steady supply of meat. Done. Find a source of fabric. Everyone needs clothes. Find a blacksmith. Tools and weapon repairs. Contact Grawl in the Eastern Quarter. Propose a trade route. Set up a place for a doctor, if a doctor can be found. Minsu came downstairs. She set a mug of water down beside him. Clean water from the new well. She stood there for a moment. Then she sat down next to him, silently. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. After a minute, Daniel realized she didn't want to talk. She wanted silence. But not alone. Silence next to someone. He continued writing. She sat there. Hannah slept in the corner on a mattress made of fabric they'd traded for last week. Ashley was on the roof. The shop exuded warmth and soft light. Outside the walls, the wind howled, and somewhere far out on the wasteland, something big and evil roared. But here it was quiet. Here it was possible. On the 32nd day, a woman entered the store with a leather bag slung over her shoulder and the scent of alcohol and dried herbs. She was older than the rest, 31. Her face was calm. Her eyes were dark, attentive, the kind of gaze people have who are used to looking at wounds without flinching. She stopped at the counter and said she'd heard there were medicines here. Daniel confirmed it. He pointed to the pharmacy shelf. 3 little boxes. The woman walked over. She opened each one. She sniffed. She rubbed some between her fingers. She nodded. She said the fireflower root was good, but wasn't being stored properly. It needed a dark, dry container. In the light, it loses its properties within a week. Daniel looked at her with interest. He asked how she knew. She said she was a doctor, the only one within a 100-kilometer radius. Her name was So Song-young, a former student of the pre-war medical school. She had graduated 2 years before the rift. Since then, she had been practicing in the field, without instruments, without a lab, using whatever she could find. She crouched down in front of the boxes and began explaining to Daniel what he was doing wrong. The root of the fireflower must be stored in a sealed container. The bark of the gray tree must not be kept near the moon moth powder because the moisture from the bark destroys the active ingredients in the powder. The dosage he gave clients with the painkiller was correct, but only for adult men. For women, it needs to be reduced by 1/3. For children, by half. Daniel listened and took notes. Every word. Song-young spoke for 20 minutes. Then she stopped. She looked at the notebook in his hands, then at him, and asked why he was taking notes. Daniel said that knowledge is a commodity, the most valuable one. It doesn't spoil. It doesn't weigh anything. It doesn't take up space on a shelf. But without it, everything else is useless. Song-young was silent. Then she said she needed a place to work. She treats patients wherever she can, in ruins, out in the open, in other people's homes. Patients don't always make it to her. Sometimes she can't reach them. She needs a corner, a permanent one, with a roof, with clean water, with a supply of medicine. She's willing to pay with herbs. She has a supply gathered from the wastelands. Chamomile, plantain, celandine, hemlock root, a painkiller in small doses. Daniel didn't haggle. He offered her not a corner, but a separate room, in the store, with her name on the door, with access to the pharmacy shelf, with clean water from the well, and one condition. Everyone who comes to see her during business hours gets treated for free. The store pays. Song-young looked at him as if he were crazy. She asked if he understood how much it would cost. There are 100 people in Lowfield. Half of them are sick with something. 1/3 need constant treatment. The medicine will run out in a week. Daniel said it wouldn't run out, that the system restocks the pharmacy shelf after every major deal. The more deals, the more medicine. The more medicine, the more people come. The more people come, the more deals. A cycle, the same one. Song-young was silent for a long time, a whole minute. Then she asked what he really wanted from her. Daniel said he needed a doctor on the team, a living one, a real one. Not boxes of herbs, but a person who knows what to do when the herbs don't help. Song-young said she couldn't always help, that she didn't have half the tools, that she lost patients every month, that sometimes she just sat there and waited for a person to die because there was nothing else she could do. Daniel nodded and said that was work too, being there when there's nothing you can do, and that she wouldn't have to do this work alone anymore. Song-young turned away. She stood facing the wall. Then she turned back. Her eyes were red but dry. She said she agreed, and asked where her room was. The room appeared that very day. The system responded to the new contract. The wall to the right of the basement stairs slid open, revealing a room behind it. Small, about 8 square meters, Stone walls, a clean floor, a shelf for instruments, 2 hooks on the wall, a small table, and a stool. Song-young entered. She set down her bag. She laid out her instruments. 2 knives, a thin one and a thick one, tweezers, glued together, a skein of suture thread, 3 vials of tinctures, a jar of ointment. That was the entire of the only doctor for 100 kilometers around. She hung the instruments on the hooks. She placed the vials on the shelf. She stood in the middle of the room and surveyed her new workplace. Then she went out to Daniel and said she needed a door, with a sign. Daniel asked what to write. Song-young said, Dr. Song-young, seeing patients. And she added that office hours were from morning until noon. Afternoon was for emergencies. Daniel wrote it on a piece of wood. He hung it above the entrance to the room. The letters came out crooked. Min-soo looked at it and said his handwriting still looked like a chicken's. But there was a sign, and it worked. The first patient arrived that very hour, a woman from the Western District, with an abscess on her arm. Song-young lanced the abscess. She rinsed it, treated it with an antiseptic from the pharmacy shelf, applied a bandage. The woman asked how much it would cost. Song-young looked at Daniel. Daniel shook his head. The woman didn't understand. Song-young explained that it was free, that the store was paying for it. The woman began to cry, not from pain, from the fact that for the first time in years, someone had touched her with clean hands and hadn't asked for silver in return. In her first week on the job, Song-young saw 23 patients. Cuts, burns, chronic wounds, coughs, fevers, 1 broken bone. A 10-year-old boy. He'd fallen from a wall, his forearm. Song-young set the bone and applied a splint made of sticks and bandages. The boy screamed. Then he quieted down. Then he fell asleep. The boy's mother sat in the shop for 3 hours, in silence, holding her son by his good arm. When he woke up, she approached Daniel and asked how she could repay him. Daniel said he could tell everyone he knew about the shop. The mother nodded. 2 days later, 5 more families arrived from the Western District. Everyone wanted to see the doctor. Everyone became a customer. The system registered transactions one after another. Not monetary. Information. Loyalty. Trust. Each one counted. Each one added. By the end of the 2nd month, the shop had reached level 20. The space had expanded to 70 square meters. A 2nd row of shelves had been added along the right wall. Supplies arrived steadily. Hunters brought meat. Gatherers from the surrounding area brought herbs. Someone brought fabric. Someone brought clay. One old man dragged in a whole sack of nails. Rusty, crooked, but real iron nails. Daniel accepted every one, straightened them out, sorted them by size, placed them on a separate shelf. Tools and fasteners, a new section. Hana had mastered the new area in a day. The nails lay in neat rows by size, from small on the left to large on the right, each row at the same distance. Daniel looked at her work and thought that in her previous life she would have won a prize for her display. Here he gave her a dried apple. Hana ate it with a serious expression, as if she were performing a work duty. On the 45th day, 2 events occurred. The first was quiet. The second was not. The quiet one happened in the morning. Daniel went down to the basement to check the cold room. The meat was there. The herbs were there. The water in the barrel was clean. Everything was fine. He turned to go back up and noticed that the wall in the far corner of the cold room had changed. The stones had shifted. A narrow passage had formed, like a crack. narrow enough to squeeze through sideways. He didn't remember this passage yesterday. The system was silent. No notifications. Daniel took one of the mana crystals from the shelf. Dull. But it gave off enough light to see a step ahead. He squeezed through the crack. Beyond it was a corridor. Narrow. Low. About 5 meters long. The walls were smooth. The floor was dry. It smelled of old stone and something else. Paper. Old paper. The corridor ended in a small room, 2 by 2 meters. The ceiling was low. Daniel could only stand there, slightly hunched over. A stone shelf ran along the wall. A notebook lay on it, a thick one, in a leather binding, cracked, darkened by time. Daniel picked up the notebook. He opened it. The first page. The lines were handwritten. The handwriting was small, neat, and the letters were English. Daniel held his breath. He was standing in the basement of a store in another world. A world where there was no America and no English language. And he was holding a notebook written in English. The first line. Today I opened the store, October 3rd, 1962. Daniel sat down on the floor, leaned against the wall, and began to read. Robert Chen, an American, a businessman from San Francisco, owner of a chain of laundromats, killed in a car accident in 1961, woke up here, in this very room, on this same floor. He found the same sign. He received the same system. He opened the store. The entries were businesslike, dry, like an account book. Date, transactions for the day, new merchandise, store inventory, condition of the walls, customers' names. Chen wrote methodically, every day, without fail, 25 years, from 1962 to 1987. Daniel flipped through the pages. The town was called Lowfield back then, 8,000 residents, a thriving commercial hub. Chen's store became the center of town life within the first 5 years. By the 10th year, it was the largest commercial enterprise on the southwestern frontier. Chen sold everything: food, tools, medicine, fabrics, weapons, magic crystals. He built a network of suppliers throughout the region. Caravans came to Lowfield from all directions. The town grew along with the store. New buildings, paved streets, a school, a hospital, a garrison. Daniel read and learned. The same patterns, the same principles. Chen also knew this kind of calculation. He knew what rotation was. He knew that a customer must leave satisfied. He knew that greed kills business. 2 managers from different eras, different cities, different lives, the same system, the same rules. But then the records changed. Around the year 1982, Chen began writing about cracks, not in the store's walls, in the world. The sky was changing, turning green. At night, flashes appeared on the horizon. The mages in the city began to fall ill. Spells failed. Crystals discharged faster than before. Chen wrote that he felt pressure, that the system was warning him, that the boundary between worlds was thinning, that the shop was an anchor, that as long as the doors were open, the world held together. The last 5 years of entries were alarming. Chen wrote that someone was trying to close the shop. Not competitors, not gangsters, something else. Shadows, voices, a disease that was eating away at his body. He was aging faster than he should have. At 60, he looked 80. His hands were shaking. The handwriting in his last entries was jagged, uneven. The letters jumped around. The last page. March 15th, 1987. There were no entries for that day, just one word, in large letters, across the page. Close. Close. And a brown stain. Old. Dried. But Daniel knew what it was. Blood. He closed the notebook. He sat in silence. Chen was dead, or had been killed. The store had closed. 4 years later, the long night happened. The great rift. The sky cracked. The creatures poured in. 3/4 of the world perished. Coincidence. Or not. The system was silent. It didn't confirm. It didn't deny. It just waited. Daniel hid the notebook under a stone shelf. He went back to the store. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. First, he had to understand. The second event of the day was a big one. By evening, Ashley came down from the roof. Quickly, abruptly. Her face was stern. She said one word. Caravan. Daniel stepped out onto the porch. A column was moving along the road from the south. 6 wagons, drawn by animals Daniel had never seen before. Large, 4-legged, with armor on their backs and blunt snouts. People walked alongside the wagons, armed. 20, maybe 25. Light armor, leather and metal. A flag fluttered on the first wagon, black with a gold symbol. Scales against the backdrop of a mountain. Minsu saw the flag and turned pale. She said it was the House of Khan, the largest trading clan in the eastern wastes, salt monopolists. They control 4 salt mines and all the trade routes to them. If they're here, it means they've heard about the shop. Daniel asked if that was good or bad. Minsu said, House Khan doesn't come to trade. House Khan comes to rule. The caravan stopped near the square. A man stepped out of the lead wagon. Tall, lean, dressed better than anyone in Lowfield. Clean fabric, unscuffed boots, a belt with a silver buckle, a polite face, a plastered-on smile. Daniel recognized this type in half a second. A regional representative. Man who comes with an offer you can't refuse. He'd seen men like this in his former life. They came from big chains and offered takeovers. Always with a smile. Always with favorable terms. Always with a threat in the subtext. The representative approached the store. He stopped at the threshold. He looked around. He saw the walls, the light, the merchandise on the shelves, the well behind the counter, the doctor's sign. He nodded, approvingly, like an expert assessing a property. Then he looked at Daniel and said his name was Tail, that he represented the business interests of the House of Han in the south-southwestern borderlands, and that he would like to discuss a partnership. Daniel invited him inside, offered him water. Tail sat on a stool that the system had grown out of the floor 2 days ago. He drank the water in small sips. He surveyed the store. He was counting. Daniel saw him counting. Goods on the shelves, approximate value, the flow of customers, turnover, potential. Tail proposed the following. House Khan takes the store under its wing, ensures a steady supply of salt, protection for the caravan, access to trade routes, inclusion in the house's network, a unified standard of trade. In return, Daniel would give House Han 40% of the turnover and a veto right over pricing policy. 40%. Daniel had heard similar offers before. When the 7-Mart chain offered to buy out his store in Tacoma, the terms were similar. We'll give you support. We'll give you the brand. We'll give you supplies. And you'll give us control. Daniel turned them down back then. The 7-Mart manager left angry. 6 months later, he opened a store across the street, which closed 8 months later because Daniel knew the neighborhood and they didn't. Daniel asked Tail what would happen if he refused. Tail smiled even wider. He said that Dom Khan preferred a partnership, but Dom Han also controls the salt supply. All the salt in the southwestern border region goes through them. If a store is off the grid, it has no salt. And without salt in this world, you won't get very far. A threat. A gentle one. A polite one. Wrapped in silk. But a threat nonetheless. Daniel nodded. He said he appreciated the offer, that he'd think it over, that he'd give an answer in 3 days. Tail nodded, finished his water, thanked him, left. The caravan remained in the square. House Khan's people had set up camp. Tents, campfires, guards along the perimeter. They weren't going anywhere until they got an answer. Ashley stood nearby, silently. Then she said that 25 armed men in the square wasn't a partnership. It was a siege. Daniel agreed, and said he had 3 days to come up with an answer that was neither partnership nor war, but something third. Minsu asked what the third option was. Daniel said he didn't know yet, but that there's always a third option. It's just harder to find. 3 days. 60 hours, not counting sleep. Daniel spent the first 12 of them behind the counter, thinking, writing, crossing things out, writing again. The problem was simple in its formulation, but complex to solve. The House of Han controlled the salt. Salt was the basic currency. Without salt, the store would lose half its transactions. Accepting the terms meant losing independence. Refusing meant losing the salt. Both options were bad. A third was needed. At the 13th hour, Minsu arrived. She sat down next to him. She looked at his notes. She asked what he was thinking about. Daniel said he was thinking about water. Minsu didn't understand. Daniel explained. In his former world, there was a company that sold bottled water, ordinary water, tap water, but in beautiful bottles with labels. And people paid 30 times more for it than the same tap water cost. Because the bottle was convenient. Because the label inspired trust. Because people don't buy a product, they buy a solution to a problem. The Khan family sells salt. That's their product. But what if we offered people not salt, but the solution to the problem that salt solves? Mintu asked what problem salt solves. Daniel listed them. Preserving meat, purifying water, treating wounds, washing the skin, seasoning food. Salt isn't just one product, it's 5 products in one. And if you break those 5 down into 5 separate solutions, each one can be replaced. Preservation. A cold room in the basement solved that problem without salt. Meat kept for weeks. Water purification. The well in the store provided clean water. No need to purify it. Wound treatment. An antiseptic made from moon moth wings better than a salt solution. Skin cleansing. Soap. Daniel had soap. Only seasoning remained, and here salt was indispensable. But seasoning is a luxury, not a necessity. People can live without tasty food. They cannot live without clean water and medicine. Daniel looked at Minsu and said that Dom Khan thinks he's selling a necessity, but in reality, he's selling a habit. The habit of thinking you can't live without salt. But you can, if there are alternatives, and the store has them. Minsu thought about it. Then she said that it's good for the store, but bad for the people outside the walls. Those who aren't the store's customers still depend on salt, and Dom Khan could jack up prices for everyone else in retaliation. Daniel nodded. She was right. A solution only for oneself is no solution. It's isolation, and isolation kills trade. He thought for another hour. Then he called Ashley. He asked what she knew about Dom Khan's trade routes. Ashley knew a little, but she knew the main points. 4 salt mines in the east. Caravans travel along 2 routes, the northern one through the mountains, the southern one through the wasteland. Both are dangerous. Caravans lose 5 to 10% of their cargo on every crossing. Beasts, bandits, breakdowns, losses. 5 to 10% on every crossing. Daniel looked at the map he'd sketched in his notebook based on Bart and Minz's stories. Rough, inaccurate, but sufficient. Lowfield stood at the crossroads, between the northern and southern routes. If a caravan passed through Lowfield, it shortened the journey by 2 days. 2 days meant one less night in the wasteland. Fewer losses, less danger. The House of Khan controlled the salt, but it didn't control the roads, it didn't control the safety of the routes, and it didn't control Lowfield. Not yet. On the second day, Daniel asked Ferg to come to the store. Ferg came, wary. After a month of working at the store, his men had grown fat. Their faces had filled out. Clubs had been replaced by knives from the supplies the hunters had brought. Patrolling had become routine, a habit, almost a profession. Daniel offered Ferg an expansion. Not just the roads within Lowfield, the road from Lowfield to the nearest southern settlement, 12 kilometers, patrolling once every 2 days, double pay. Ferg asked why. Daniel said that a safe road is a trade route. A trade route means caravans. Caravans mean goods. Goods mean food. Food means life. Ferg understood the logic. Not the whole chain, but enough. He agreed. On the third day, morning, Teul came for an answer. Smile in place, guards behind him. Daniel met him behind the counter. Standing nearby were Min and Ashley standing nearby. Song-Yun was in the office. Hana sat on the stairs to the basement and listened. Daniel said he was rejecting the partnership proposal in its current form. Teul stopped smiling. Daniel continued. He said he was offering a counter-proposal. Not a partnership, not a takeover. A trade agreement. An equal one. The House of Han would receive the right to a transshipment base in Lowfield, free of charge. Caravans could stop there, restock supplies, receive medical care for the wounded, use a safe, patrolled route. In exchange, the House of Han would sell salt to the store at a fixed price. Not a monopoly price, a market price. The same price at which it sells to other settlements. No markup for Lowfield, and no veto over the shop's policies. Tail was silent. He was calculating, Daniel could see. A transshipment hub meant savings on every trip. 2 days' journey, minus losses, minus the cost of guarding overnight stops. Medical care for the caravanners, a safe route. All of this cost money that House Khan spent on every crossing. Daniel didn't ask for a cut of the revenue, didn't ask for exclusivity, didn't ask for control. He asked for a fair price for salt, and he offered services that Dom Khan couldn't get anywhere else on the southwestern frontier. Teil asked what if Dom Khan refused. Daniel shrugged and said that then the caravans would continue to take the long route, losing people, losing cargo, and the store would trade without salt. Harder, slower, but it would survive. Because salt is a habit, not a necessity. There's water, there's medicine, there's cold storage, there's soap, and habits can be changed. Tail looked at him for a long time. Then he said he'd pass the offer on to Dom, that the decision wasn't his to make. Daniel nodded, said he'd wait. Tail left. The caravan stayed put for 2 more days. On the morning of the 3rd day, Tail returned. He said that Dom Han accepted the terms, temporarily, for 6 months, a trial period. Daniel didn't object. 6 months is enough. In 6 months, the caravans will get used to the route through Lowfield. Habit. That very one. Only this time, working in his favor. The system registered the deal. A trade agreement. Dom Khan Southwest Branch. Lowfield Store. Both parties satisfied. Conditionally. And a new notification flashed in his peripheral vision. Store level, 25. New skill available. Weapons counter with auto repair function. Daniel looked at the right wall of the store. The stone parted. A wide stone countertop slid out from the wall, smooth, with recesses for blades,
with grooves for handles, and with a small recess for a mana crystal.
He inserted the crystal. The countertop hummed, quietly, barely audible. Ashley approached. She placed her knife on the countertop. The recess adjusted to the size of the blade. The knife glowed. 1 second, 2, 3. The glow faded. Ashley picked up the knife. She ran her finger along the blade. She squinted. She opened her eyes. And for the first time in all the time Daniel had known her, an expression appeared on her face that could be called delight. The knife was like new, better than new, sharpened to perfection, the balance corrected. The tiny nicks on the blade had vanished. Ashley looked at Daniel and said that the trial period was over. She was staying. The end of the second month brought a change that Daniel hadn't planned for. Tents began to appear around the store. Bart set up the first one, right across from the entrance. He stretched a piece of cloth between 2 sticks. Underneath, he laid out what he had to trade: 3 old pots, a bundle of dry roots, and a piece of leather. An improvised counter. Bart sat under the cloth and waited for customers. A day later, a second tent appeared nearby.
A woman from the eastern quarter who had once traded a rope for meat. Now she had brought a whole sack of ropes. She had braided them herself. Different sizes, different thicknesses. She laid them out on the rocks and wrote with charcoal on a piece of wood what she charged for each one. A third tent. A fourth. By the end of the week, there were 8 tents in front of the store. A spontaneous market. People traded among themselves. Small things. Things they knew how to make with their hands. Pots, ropes, leather, dried roots, wooden spoons, bone carvings. No one asked Daniel for permission. No one asked if it was okay. They just came and set up. Because it was safe here. Because people came here. Because the light from the store's windows could be seen from afar and drew people in like a lighthouse. Daniel stepped out into the square in the morning. He surveyed the tents. 8. About 20 people of merchants and shoppers, plus onlookers, plus children. About 40 in all. Lowfield hadn't seen such a crowd since before the war. Minso stood nearby. She said quietly that this was a problem. Daniel asked why. She said that people were trading without rules, without prices, without standards. One sells a rope for 2 pieces of meat, another for 3, a third for 5. Buyers get confused. They start arguing. Yesterday, 2 men nearly came to blows over the price of a pot. The store's security zone didn't extend beyond the walls, 4 meters from the walls. The tents stood further out. The system didn't protect that area. Daniel nodded. She was right. A spontaneous, unregulated market is chaos. Chaos means conflict. Conflict scares customers away. Scared off customers mean lost sales. Lost sales mean stagnation. Rules are needed. He spent the evening with his notebook. In the morning, he hung a board on the store wall. A big one. Smooth. The system had grown it out of stone at his request. It was the first time he had consciously asked the system for something. It responded. Not instantly, an hour later, but it responded. On the board, Daniel wrote the market rules, in charcoal, in large letters. Minsu helped with the wording because some of Daniel's words had no equivalent in the local language. Rule 1. Trade in the square is free. There are no duties. Rule 2.
Disputes are settled at the store counter. The store owner is the arbitrator.
Rule 3. Deceiving a buyer is punishable by expulsion from the square for 7 days. Rule 4. All prices are listed in a unified system. 1 unit equals 1 standard-sized portion of dried meat. Below is a list of goods with approximate prices. Soap, 3 units. Bandage, 2 units. 10 grams of salt, 1 unit. Charged mana crystal, 10 units. Utility knife, 5 units. Daniel didn't set prices in stone. He provided guidelines. Bargaining was allowed. But now people had a scale, a starting point, a common language. When a buyer said it was too expensive, they could point to the board and say, "Look here, soap is 3 units, and you're asking for 5. Why?" And the seller had to explain. Simple transparency. The same principle as the price tags at the store on 4th and Pine. People don't like being cheated, but people are willing to pay if they understand what they're paying for. The board hung there for a week. By the end of the week, the arguments had cut in half. 2 merchants left the square, the ones who were overcharging. The rest stayed. New ones arrived. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 14 stalls. On the 60th day in Lo-Fi, there were already 150 people living in Lo-Fi. 50 more than 2 months ago. People came from the surrounding ruins, from the eastern quarter, from distant farmsteads. Rumors spread. There's a store there. There's a doctor there. There's clean water there. They don't beat people there. 50 new residents meant 50 new mouths to feed, but also 50 pairs of hands. People started building, not because Daniel asked them to, because they wanted to stay. And to stay, you need a roof. The first new house went up across from the store. Rough, stone, made from the rubble of old buildings, but with a roof, with a door, with a hearth. The second, the third. By the end of the 2nd month, there were 11 houses standing in the square around the store. A street. The first street. Nameless. Just a street. Hannah suggested naming it. Daniel asked how. Hannah thought for a moment and said, Market Street. Because people trade there. Logical. The name stuck. Lowfield Trade Street. On the 63rd day, Clarissa Young arrived. Daniel didn't immediately realize who she was. Small, skinny, wearing glasses taped together in 3 places. Her clothes were clean but worn. Behind her back, a bag stuffed with something heavy. She entered the store. She stopped. She looked at the shelves, at the little boxes, at the price board, at the notebook by the counter, at the column of numbers Daniel had written down that morning. And she froze. She walked up to the counter, leaned over, looked at the numbers, then at Daniel, and said he was counting wrong. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Clarissa pointed to a line. Right here, weekly expenses. Daniel added up the items and got 112 units. Clarissa said it was 114, because he hadn't counted the 2 portions of meat that went toward paying for Ferg's patrols on Wednesday. They hadn't gone through the register, direct transfer. But consumption is still consumption. Daniel looked at his records. She was right. He'd missed 2 units. At the store on 4th, a mistake like that would have earned him a dressing down from the auditor. He asked how she knew. Clarissa said she'd spent 4 years living in the archives of the Veltran trading house. Before the rift, Veltran had been the largest trading company in the Southwest. After the rift, all that remained of the company was a basement full of documents. Clarissa found the basement, barricaded herself in, and for 4 years she read. Trade reports, ledgers, contracts, invoices, inventory lists, thousands of pages. She read it all. Daniel asked why. Clarissa adjusted her glasses and said it was because it made sense, that the world outside was chaos, but in the numbers there was order. That when she read how Veltran organized grain shipments from 6 provinces, she saw a system, a beautiful one, a working one, a broken one, but she saw it. And it gave her a headache, because seeing how things should be and seeing how they are at the same time is painful. Daniel looked at her and recognized her. Not a person, a type, an analyst. A person who lives in spreadsheets and finds beauty in them. He knew people like that. There was one at the chain's headquarters, Mark, a quiet guy in a sweater, who could find an error in a 300-page report in half an hour and couldn't strike up a conversation with a cashier. Daniel offered Clarissa a job. She asked what kind. He said accounting. Full-time. All store and market operations. Receipts, expenses, turnover, inventory, forecasts. Everything she knew how to do and everything that was needed. Clarissa asked what she would get. Daniel said a roof over her head, food, and access to the ledgers, to all of them, without restrictions. Clarissa was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said she needed a desk and paper. Lots of paper. Daniel looked at the system. He asked mentally. The wall behind the counter slid out a small stone desk, smooth, with a recess for an inkwell. A notebook appeared on the desk. A new, thicker than the previous one. Clarissa sat down. She opened the notebook. She picked up a pencil and began to write. 2 hours later, she had compiled a complete inventory list for the store. 57 items, with dates of receipt, with estimated values, with current balances, with a forecast of weekly consumption. Daniel read it. Not a single mistake. He looked at Clarissa. She was adjusting her glasses and waiting. He said she was hired. Clarissa nodded and asked where to get more paper. Minsu watched from the corner. She approached Daniel when Clarissa left to get settled. She said quietly that she didn't like how easily he hired people, that every new person was a mouth to feed, and a risk, and an unknown. Daniel nodded. He said she was right, and that was exactly why he needed someone like Clarissa, to count the mouths, to count the risks, to count the unknowns, and turn them into numbers. Because numbers don't lie. Minsu was silent for a moment. Then she said he was strange, that no one she knew ever spoke that way. Daniel said he was a manager. Managers talk strangely. It's professional. Minsu didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched. On the 70th day, the system showed 78 transactions. Store level 30. The building had grown to a 2nd floor. Not overnight, as it would be later. Slowly, brick by brick. The walls rose higher every night. In the morning, they were a centimeter higher than yesterday. 2 weeks later, the 2nd floor was ready. 4 rooms. Small, but with doors, with windows, with warm walls. Daniel assigned them. 1 for Minsu and Hana, 1 for Song-young, 1 for Ashley, 1 for Clarissa. He stayed downstairs himself, behind the counter. Minsu objected. She said it was warmer and more comfortable upstairs. Daniel said that the owner sleeps in the store. That's the rule. Minsu asked whose. Daniel said his own. That a store you leave unattended at night is a store you don't love. Minsu was silent again. But in the evening, she brought him downstairs a blanket made of the fabric they'd traded for last week, and a mug of hot water with that Song-young had found on the outskirts of town. Daniel took them.
He said thank you. Minsu went upstairs. She stopped on the stairs. She didn't turn around. She said he should eat more, that she could see his ribs through his shirt, and that this was unacceptable for a shop owner. Then she left. Daniel sat behind the counter with a mug of mint tea and a blanket. The shop hummed quietly. The walls were warm. The light from the crystals was soft. The floorboards creaked upstairs. Someone was walking. Song Young. She went to bed later than everyone else. She checked the medicine supplies before sleeping. Ashley was sitting on the roof. Daniel knew this without looking. She always sat on the roof before bed. She looked out at the wasteland. She thought about something she didn't say out loud. Hannah had been asleep for a long time. She was the first to fall asleep and the first to wake up.
Like clockwork, Clarissa was counting somewhere in her room. Daniel could hear the scratch of a pencil on paper through the wall. 5 people. His team. Not the one he would have chosen in his former life. Not the one HR would have approved. But the one that was needed here and now. On the 75th day, the caravan of refugees emerged from the fog on the southern road. 40 people. Maybe more. Ashley saw them first from the roof. She came down. She said they were moving slowly, that half of them were limping, that they were carrying children in their arms, that they had no weapons. Daniel stepped out onto the porch. It was a cold morning. The green in the sky had grown denser in recent days. Bart said it was a bad sign, that the sky had been the same before the long night. The column was approaching. A man with a bandage on his head walked in front, brown with dried blood. He was holding the hand of a woman who was holding the hand of a child. The rest trailed behind them, ragged, dirty, with the faces of people who had been walking for a very long time and didn't know why. Minsu stood next to Daniel. She said quietly that she recognized the mark on the front man's clothing, the settlement Gornwood. It was in the east, 200 residents, fortified, with a stockade and night watch. If they're like this here, then Gornwood is no more. Daniel asked what had happened. The man with the bandage reached the square. He stopped. His legs gave way. He sat down right on the stones and spoke. A rift, a new one. It opened up at night, 3 kilometers from the settlement. The creatures poured out without warning. Not small ones, big ones. The kind they hadn't seen in 11 years. Not since then. The guards fell within the first 10 minutes. The palisade was burning. People ran in all directions. Out of 200, 40 survived. Maybe fewer. We lost 2 more on the way. A 6-year-old boy. He couldn't handle the journey. An old man. Heart failure. 38 people stood in Lowfield Square, unsure what to do next. Locals were already gathering around, watching, silently, fear in their eyes. Not for the refugees, for themselves. A new fault line in the east meant the wave could reach here too. It meant Lowfield was next. Daniel saw the fear creeping across the square. He saw women clutching their children close. How men were looking back toward the east. How hands were reaching for weapons that almost no one had. Panic. He knew what panic looked like. He'd seen it once when the power went out in Tacoma for 3 days after a storm, and people started buying up water and canned goods. Panic starts in the eyes. Then it moves to the hands, then to the feet, and then people run. And when they run, they trample each other. Daniel turned to Minsu and said, "Open the doors." Wide open. Both wings. Minsu looked at him, then at the crowd. Then she nodded and went. The doors opened. Wide. Daniel stepped out into the square. He stood in front of the man with the bandage. He bent down. He held out his hand. The man looked at the hand, then at Daniel. He took it. Daniel helped him to his feet and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Come in, everyone, right now. It's safe inside. It's warm inside. There's water and food inside. Go." 38 people were looking at him, at the door, at the light beyond the door. Then the first one stepped forward, a woman with a child, a man behind her, 2 more behind him. A stream, slow, limping, but a stream. They entered the store and stopped, because it was warm inside, because it smelled of herbs and soap, because the light from the crystals was soft and didn't blind them, because the stone walls stood firm and nothing creaked or wobbled. Daniel worked. He didn't think. He worked. His body remembered what to do. 8 years in retail, thousands of shifts, crisis days, Black Fridays, power outages, floods. He knew how to manage a flow of people in a confined space. The injured to Song-young. She was already in the office. The door was open. The instruments were laid out. Her face was calm. Her hands were quick. The children to the basement. It was warm and safe there. Hana met them downstairs. Without words, she simply showed them where to sit, where to lie down, where the water was. The adults to the sales floor. Minsu was handing out water from the well, mug after mug. Ashley stood by the door. She controlled the flow, letting 5 people through at a time. No crowding, no pushing. Clarissa sat at the table, taking notes. Everyone. Name, age, condition, what they needed. The pen scratched across the paper, non-stop. Daniel went down to the cold room. He took out the meat, all there was. 20 portions, not enough for 38 people. He stood up, looked at the system, asked, not with words, with a thought. The system flashed. The shelves behind the counter shook. New stock, crackers, coarse, dark, 30 servings, grain porridge in canvas bags, 10, water in sealed flasks, 15. The system was giving away its supplies. Not from nowhere. Daniel could feel the store spending something, how the level dipped slightly, how the walls became thinner for a second. A price. But the system was paying, because 38 people had entered the store, and every one of them was in need, and every one of them could be helped. The night was long. Song-young worked without a break. 17 wounded, 4 in serious condition, 1 critical. A man with a burn on his back, skin torn from his shoulder blades to his lower back. The creature had scratched him with a claw. Song-young cleaned the wound for 2 hours, applied ointment, bandaged it. Daniel stood nearby. He handed her bandages. He changed the water. He didn't say a word. He was just there. By morning, the man had fallen asleep. Song-young sat down on the floor. She leaned against the wall. She closed her eyes. Her hands were trembling from exhaustion. Daniel placed a mug of mint water next to her. Song-young opened one eye. She looked at the mug, then at him. She said he should sleep. Daniel said the store never sleeps. Song-young said the store isn't a person. Daniel didn't answer. Minsu was serving tea. Real tea. Made from the herbs Song-young had gathered. Hot, slightly sweet. She moved from one person to another. A mug, a word, a nod. Next, a mug, a word, a nod. Next. Her face was calm, composed. Her hands didn't tremble. She was in her element. Taking care of others was what she'd done her whole life. The difference was that now she wasn't doing it alone. Ashley on the roof. All night. Didn't sleep. Looked east, toward where the refugees had come from. toward where a new rift had opened. Ferg and his men stood on the roads, double patrol, without orders. They decided on their own, because if the creatures were following the refugees, the road had to be blocked. By dawn, 38 people were asleep, on the stone floor, on mattresses, on rags, on whatever they could find. Hannah covered the children with blankets, one by one, carefully, with a serious expression, tucking each one in at the sides, just as Minsu had once done for her. Daniel stood by the window. Dawn painted the sky pink and green at the same time, the strange beauty of a ruined world. Minsu approached. She stood beside him, silently. Then she placed a mug on the windowsill, his mug, with coffee. The last coffee from the can. She had saved it for 3 weeks, for a special occasion. Daniel took the mug. He looked at Minsu. She was looking out the window. Then she said that he understood that they were his now, all 38 of them, that they wouldn't leave, that they would live here, that he had taken responsibility for 40 additional lives with a single decision. Daniel nodded. He said he understood. Minsu said he was crazy. Daniel said he was a manager. It was the same thing. Minsu didn't smile, but she moved half a step closer and stayed standing next to him, shoulder to shoulder. The system flashed. 38 trust transactions registered simultaneously. Daniel looked at the walls. They were trembling. The stone was moving, not outward, upward. The ceiling was rising. The walls were stretching. The floor was expanding. People woke up from the vibration and watched as the store was being rebuilt right before their eyes. The second floor pushed outward. The third began to grow out of the roof. Rooms multiplied. Small, simple, but with doors, with windows, with warm walls. By noon, the store stood 3 stories tall, with a turret on the roof. The refugees went outside. They looked up, silently. Then, one by one, they began to climb the stairs, to find rooms, to enter, to close the doors. And behind those doors, for the first time in days, in weeks, in months, to feel safe, they had a home. Haya Moon appeared on the 80th day. She didn't look like anyone Daniel had seen in Lowfield. Clean clothes. Not just clean, but well-groomed. A heavy-duty travel coat with embroidery on the collar. Leather boots, unscuffed. Her hair styled. 2 rings on her fingers, one with a stone. She entered the store with a light step, looked around, smiled, broadly, warmly, professionally. Daniel recognized that smile. He had seen it in the mirror every workday for 8 years. A salesperson's smile. She approached the counter and said she was a traveling merchant, that she was coming from the south, that she had heard about the shop in Lowfield and decided to stop by, that she had goods that might be of interest, silk fabric, spices, 2 high-charge mana crystals. Daniel listened, nodded, looked. Not at the goods, at her. Her hands, well manicured, but calluses on the index and middle fingers of her right hand. Not from work, from writing. A lot of writing. A person who writes a lot in a world where 10% of the population is literate is not a merchant. Her shoes, expensive, but the soles were worn evenly, not like a traveler who walks the roads, like someone who walks on smooth floors, on stone floors, on the floors of large buildings. Her gaze, attentive, too attentive for a merchant's wife. Merchants look at the goods, She looked at the people, at the layout of the rooms, at the thickness of the walls, at the well, at the pharmacy. She was assessing, evaluating, not like a customer, like a scout. Daniel said nothing. He invited her to look around the store. He led her through the sales floor, showed her the shelves, explained the pricing system, offered her tea. Haya accepted. She drank, she smiled, she asked questions, lots of questions. Where the goods came from, how many customers a day, were there connections to other settlements? What was the turnover? A merchant's questions. At first glance. But the order was different. A merchant asks about the goods and then about logistics. She asked about the people and then about the structure. A scout. She stayed for 3 days. She traded. She sold silk for a good price. She bought medicine. She traded crystals. Everything was clean. Everything was right. The system recorded the transactions without any violations. Haya smiled at everyone. Minsu, Ashley, Song-young, Clarice, Hana. She said something warm to each of them. The right thing. Perfectly chosen. A compliment to Minsu about her organizational skills. Admiration for Ashley's weapon. Respect for Song-young for her work. A question for Clarice about accounting methodology that made her talk for 20 minutes without stopping. A smile and a dried fruit. She read each one in a minute. She gave each one what she wanted to hear. A professional. On the 4th day, Daniel invited Haya for tea. In the evening, when the store closed. Hana was asleep. Minsu was upstairs. Ashley was on the roof. Song-young was in the office. Clarissa was counting. They sat behind the counter. Daniel poured tea. He set a cup in front of her, then one for himself. He took a sip, and said she played beautifully, but that he'd worked in retail for 8 years, and he could spot actors. Haya stopped smiling. Not abruptly, slowly, as if a mask were dissolving into the air. Beneath the mask was another face. Not angry, not hostile. Confused. She was silent for 30 seconds. Then she asked how he had figured it out. Daniel said it was the calluses from writing, that the soles were from stone floors, that the order of his questions revealed an analyst, not a merchant, and that no merchant in the wasteland wears 2 rings. 1 might be an ornament. 2 is a sign of affiliation, a symbol, a seal. House Khan wears rings with scales. On her right ring, scales. Small ones, almost imperceptible, but Daniel noticed. Haya lowered her eyes, then raised them, and told the truth. She is an agent of House Khan, sent to assess the store from the inside, to gather information about weak spots, about the people, about the system, about whether the store could be taken without open conflict. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked one thing. Did she want to stay? For real. Haya looked at him for a long time and said she didn't understand the question. Daniel explained. He said he saw before him a person who had been a tool her entire adult life, who was sent, who carried out orders, who returned, who was sent again, and that not once in all those years had anyone asked who she was when she wasn't playing a role. Haya was silent. A minute, 2, 3. The tea had gone cold. Then she said she didn't know who she was when she wasn't playing a role. That she didn't remember. Daniel nodded and said that here she didn't have to play a role, that here she could be nobody and then become someone when she was ready. Haya stayed.
She didn't send a report to House Khan. Not that day, not the next. Never. A week later, she started working. Negotiations, meetings with caravan representatives, diplomacy. What she did best. Only now, not for House Khan, for the shop. Clarissa was the first to notice. She approached Daniel that evening, adjusted her glasses, and said that according to her calculations, Daniel wasn't from this world. Daniel froze. Clarissa explained. She had spent 4 years reading the Veltran archives, every trade document from the past 100 years. Not a single one mentioned the terms Daniel used. FIFO, loyalty program, severance pay, prime shelf space, intern, manager. These words didn't exist in any Adrian language. She had checked. She had methodically compared his terminology with every commercial text she'd read. 0 matches. Plus his accent. Minimal, but he sometimes pronounced words in a way no native speaker would. Plus his knowledge. Too systematic, too comprehensive, too foreign to a world where commerce died 11 years ago. Clarissa said the only explanation was that he came from outside, like Robert Chen before him. Daniel asked how she knew about Chen. Clarissa said she'd found a mention of him in the Veltran archives, a brief entry, a foreign merchant in Lowfield, unexplained business practices, anomalous business growth. Dated 1970. Daniel sat down. He was silent for a moment. Then he told her everything. Seattle, the store on 4th and Pine, the parking lot, the headlights, waking up on the stone floor, the system. Clarissa listened. She didn't interrupt. She took notes. When he finished, she adjusted her glasses and said that explained a lot, and that she needed time to process the data. Then she stood up and went to her room. The scratching of a pencil behind the wall continued until morning. The 100th day. The system showed 152 transactions. The store's level was 38. Lowfield was home to 300 people. The market in the square was open every day, 20 stalls. The shopping street stretched 200 meters in both directions from the store. Paved. People paved it themselves, stone by stone, without orders. Because it's easier to walk on a paved street and easier to transport goods. At the entrance to the city stood a gate, wooden, rough, but a gate. Ferg and his men stood guard there in shifts. Former gangsters had become a garrison. Not by order, out of habit. Patrolling had become their job. Food from the store had become their pay. Structure had become their life. People need structure, even gangsters. The first courier left Lowfield for the neighboring settlement of Cresthall on the 80th day. A guy named Garin, a former refugee from Hornwood. Fast, enduring, knew the wasteland. Daniel gave him a bag of goods, medicine, bandages, soap, 5 portions of salt, and a letter. For the elder of Cresthall, a proposal. A trade exchange, regular, once a week. A courier there, a courier back. Fixed prices, guaranteed safety along the route. Garin returned 4 days later, with an answer. The elder agreed. The first branch, not a store yet, an exchange point, but a connection, a thread stretching from Lowfield to another living place. The second thread stretched out on the 91st day to the settlement of Rivmark in the north. The third on the 95th to the Dalnaya Stena farmstead in the west. 3 directions, 3 routes, 3 couriers. The network
was beginning to breathe. Clarissa compiled the data into a table. She showed it to Daniel. The store's turnover for the past month had grown by 40%. Supplies were stable. Income exceeded expenses by 12%. Reserves are growing. Lowfield's population is increasing by 5 to 7 people a week. Infrastructure is expanding. Revenue from external exchange points is still minimal, but the trend is positive. Daniel listened and nodded. The numbers were good, but the numbers didn't show the main thing. On the 105th day, a horseman rode up to the store, alone, in a black cloak, with a silver seal on his chest. The gray seal. The order. The horseman dismounted, tied up his horse, entered the shop, stopped at the counter, took off his gloves, placed a scroll on the countertop, and said that Master Oreta wished to meet with the shop owner in Lowfield, in person, at his establishment, in 3 days. Daniel looked at the scroll, a gray wax seal, a palm print within a circle, the symbol of the Order of the Gray Seal, an organization that hunted the corrupted, mages tainted by the corruption from the rifts, and anything that seemed like heresy to them, a shop that grows from deals, walls that move, shelves that emerge from stone, a well gushing from the floor. To the Order, this was a distortion, heresy, corruption in a new form. Ashley stood by the door, hand on her knife. Her face was stony. Daniel told the horseman that he would receive Magister Oreta with respect, that the shop's doors were open to all, and that he asked the horseman to tell the Magister that the shop served good tea. The horseman blinked. Then he nodded, and rode away. 3 days. 3 days again. Daniel was preparing, not for defense, for a reception. Magister Oreta was not dangerous with a sword. The Order had plenty of swords, 2,000 paladins. She was dangerous with her decisions. One word from her, and Lowfield would become anathema, a cursed place. Caravans would stop coming. People would start leaving. Trade would grind to a halt. Everything that Daniel had built over 3 months would crumble in a week. It was impossible to fight this with force. He had to talk. Daniel asked Clarissa to find everything in the Veltran archives about the Order of the Gray Seal. Clarissa found it. The Order was founded a year after the Rift. Purpose? To protect people from magical corruption. The Order's commandments. 7 of them. Clarissa listed them. First, protect the weak. Second, destroy corruption. Third, do not accept payment for protection. Fourth, serve the truth. Fifth, do not use corruption, even for good. Sixth, maintain order. Seventh, remember that the world is fragile. Daniel listened and smiled. Not a professional smile, a genuine one. Because each of the 7 commandments described what his shop did. Protect the weak, free medical care, free water, a shelter for refugees. Don't charge for protection. The safety zone is free for everyone. Serve the truth, fair deals, transparent prices, a rules board. Maintain order, record keeping, system, structure. Remember that the world is fragile. He remembered, every day. Master Oreta arrived on the 108th day, not alone. With her were 4 paladins, in armor, with swords, gray cloaks, gray seals, serious faces. Oreta was a woman in her 50s, tall, thin, with a face carved from stone, light eyes, cold, intelligent. She entered the shop, and Daniel saw her scan the room, just like Ashley on the first day, only faster, more precise. Exits, walls, people, danger. But beneath the tactical assessment lay another,
a religious one. She was looking for corruption, traces of distortion, signs of heresy. Daniel met her behind the counter. He offered her a seat. He offered her tea. Oretta didn't sit down. She stood. She looked at the walls, at the shelves, at the light from the crystals, at the well, at the door to Songyong's office, at the sign with the market rules. Then she looked at Daniel and said that he knew why she was here. Daniel said he knew. Oretta said that the order had received reports of a magical object in Lowfield, of a building that grows on its own, of walls that repel violence, of goods that emerge from stone, that all of this was a sign of a distortion of the highest order, that she had come in person to assess the threat. Daniel nodded and poured some tea, set it down in front of her. Oretta looked at the cup, didn't touch it. Daniel didn't press the issue. Instead, he began to speak, quietly, calmly, as if he were explaining to a health inspector how his store was set up. He told her about the system, without holding anything back, about transactions, about levels, about the rule that violence and deception are blocked, about how the system works only on voluntary, honest exchanges, about violations and kickbacks, about how greed destroys the store and generosity builds it. Oretta listened. She didn't interrupt. Her expression didn't change. When he finished, she was silent for a minute. Then she asked one question. Where did the system come from? Daniel said he didn't know. That he found it when he woke up in this building, that it was here before him and before the previous owner, that perhaps it had always been here. Oretta looked at him, then at the tea. Then she picked up the cup, took a sip, and said that in 30 years in the order, she had seen hundreds of manifestations of corruption, each one destroyed, each one distorted, each one made things worse. The corruption doesn't build houses. It doesn't heal the sick. It doesn't feed the hungry. But what she sees here builds, heals, feeds. She doesn't understand how it works, but she sees the result. 300 people live here, well-fed, healthy, safe. This doesn't look like corruption. This looks like the commandments. Daniel was silent. He waited. Oretta finished her tea, set down the cup, stood up, and said that the order would not excommunicate Lowfield anathema. For now. That she would return in 6 months. That if the shop continued to do what it was doing, without corruption, without distortion, without evil, then the order would recognize it as neutral territory, under its protection. Daniel thanked her. Oretta turned toward the door. She paused. She looked at Dr. Songyong's sign, then at Daniel, and said the tea was good. She left. The paladins followed her. The gray cloaks vanished beyond Lowfield's gates. Ashley came down from the roof. She said she didn't believe it, that the order wouldn't retreat, never. Daniel said the order hadn't retreated. The order was thinking, and a thinking person is more dangerous than an attacker, but also more useful. Winter came on the 120th day, or what they called winter here. The temperature dropped. The sky grew heavy and dark. The green in the clouds thickened to the color of a swamp. There were more creatures in the wasteland. Ferg's patrols returned with tales of tracks they hadn't seen before. Large, deep, three-toed. Something large was roaming beyond the city limits. It hadn't attacked yet. Not yet. Daniel stood by the third-floor window and looked at the horizon. Somewhere to the east, the rift that had destroyed Hornwood continued to grow. Refugees said that at night you could see a glow, greenish, pulsating, like the heartbeat of a sick world. He went down to the basement, to the secret room behind the cold chamber. He sat down on the floor.
He opened Robert Chen's diary. He reread the last few pages. Chen wrote about the pressure, about how the system had warned him, about how the boundary between worlds was thinning, about shadows, about voices, about something that was trying to shut down the store from the inside. Daniel placed the diary on his lap, and for the first time ever, he asked the system directly, out loud. He asked if the rift to the closure of this shop. The system was silent for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then it flashed, a new message, a long one. Daniel read and felt the cold rise from the floor up his spine. The trading point system is a stabilizing anchor of reality. Every honest, voluntary transaction made within the store strengthens the boundary between worlds. Every violation weakens it. Cessation of store operations, complete cessation of commercial activity, leads to destabilization of the boundary within the anchor's radius of influence. With prolonged cessation, over 3 years, the destabilization becomes irreversible. A catastrophic rupture of the boundary is likely. The previous owner, Robert Chen, ceased operations on March 15, 1987. Reason? Death. A catastrophic rupture occurred 4 years later. Coincides with the estimated period of destabilization. Daniel sat in silence. So it's true. Chen died. The store closed. 4 years later, the world fell apart. 3/4 of the population perished. Cities turned to ruins. Civilization collapsed. Because one man in one store stopped trading. And now Daniel sat in the same spot, with the same store, with the same system. And the rifts were widening. A new one had opened in the east. The creatures were multiplying. The sky was turning green. All the signs Chen had described in recent years. The second rift was approaching. And the only thing holding him was the store. His deals, his open doors. Daniel stood up. He left the basement. He looked at the sales floor, at the shelves, at the merchandise, at the light from the crystals, at the doctor's sign, at Clarissa's desk, at the stool where Hannah had sat that morning counting dried fruit, at the door through which people entered every day, the wounded, the hungry, the lost. And they left with something, with food, with medicine, with hope, or simply with the feeling that they had been seen. He couldn't close the doors. Never. Not because the world would fall apart, although the world would fall apart, but because behind those doors were people who needed him. That evening he gathered everyone: Minsu, Ashley, Song-young, Clarissa, Haeyu, and Hannah. Because Hannah deserved to be at that table just as much as the rest. He told them everything, about Chen, about the diary, about the system, about the anchor, about the connection between the store and the rifts, about how a second rift is possible if the store stops working. There was silence for a minute. Then Ashley spoke up. She said, "So you can't leave, ever." Daniel nodded. Ashley paused. Then she said, "Then we're not leaving either." Minsu didn't say anything. She just took his hand under the table and squeezed it, briefly. Then she let go. Song-young said that if the store is an anchor, then we need more anchors, more stores, more locations. The denser the network, the stronger the border. Clarissa had already done the math. The pencil flew across the paper. She said that according to her calculations, 4 or 5 retail locations within a 100-kilometer radius would stabilize the rifts in the region, 10 to 15 across the continent. Haya said she knew people in 3 major settlements who could open locations. that it was a matter of negotiation, that she could handle it. Haya sat quietly. Then she said that if the shelves in every store were in order, the world wouldn't fall apart. Everyone looked at her. She wasn't joking. She was absolutely serious. And, in her own way, right. Order on the shelves is order in the world. That was the essence of it. Daniel looked at his team. 6 people. 6 women who had come to him broken, each in her own way, and had become something whole. Not a family in the traditional sense, something else. A team. A foundation. Each one irreplaceable, and each one knew it. He said they would start tomorrow, that the plan was simple. Expand the network. Open outposts. Pull threads from settlement to settlement. Not like an empire, like a web, where every node holds the rest, where a single broken thread doesn't bring it all crashing down. Minsu asked how much time they had. Daniel looked at the sky outside the window. Green, dark, pulsating. And he said he didn't know, but that every day counts. On the 130th day, the first trade caravan left the store. Not a stranger's, ours. 6 wagons, drawn by draft animals that Daniel had bought from a herder in exchange for a month's worth of medicine. Goods, medicines, bandages, soap, tools, salt at a fair price, notebooks, clean water in sealed flasks, and most importantly, kits for opening trading posts. In each kit, a board with the rules of trade, scales, a notebook for record-keeping, a mana crystal, and a letter from Daniel, instructions for the future owner. Simple, honest, like a handbook for a new manager. Only, instead of corporate policy, commandments. Charge a fair price. Don't cheat. Don't turn away the hungry. Write everything down. Keep the doors open. The caravan headed south, to Crosshall, to Rivmark, to the far wall, to the 3 locations that were waiting. Ashley went with the caravan, for protection. Daniel stood at the gate and watched the wagons disappear over the hill. It was the first time one of his people had gone far away. The first time he had let them go. Minsu stood beside him, silently. Then she said Ashley would return. Daniel said he knew. Minsu said she wouldn't leave either. Nowhere. Never. Daniel looked at her. Minsu was looking ahead, at the road, at the wasteland, at the green sky. Then she turned to him, and for the first time in all that time, in all 130 days, she smiled. Not just the corner of her mouth, fully, warmly, openly, like someone who had finally remembered how to do it. Day 365. A year. Exactly a year since that morning when Daniel So opened his eyes on the stone floor and saw the cracked ceiling. The morning was clear. For the first time in months, the green in the sky had receded. It hadn't disappeared, but it had grown paler, thinner, as if someone had begun to erase it at the edges. Daniel was standing on the roof, at the very top of the turret of a 3-story stone building that a year ago had been a ruin with a holey ceiling and rat droppings on the floor. The wind blew from the west, warm, smelling of smoke and bread. Bread. They were baking bread in Lowfield. The bakery had opened 2 months ago. Bart's wife, the very one who had been coughing during the first week. She had recovered, gained strength, remembered how to bake. Daniel had given her some flour from the reserves and a spot on Market Street. Now every morning the smell of fresh bread wafted through the city, and people woke up to that smell and smiled before they even opened their eyes. He looked down. Lowfield was unrecognizable. Streets had sprung up around the shop. 3.
Market Street, Craftsman Street, Doctor's Alley, paved squares, houses, 32 residential buildings, stone, with roofs, with doors, with windows. At the entrance stood a gate, a real one, fortified, with 2 towers on either side. Ferg and his men, whom no one had called the Rats in a long time, guarded the gate in shifts. 12 men, armed, disciplined. Daniel paid them with food and medicine. They paid the city with security. A fair exchange. People were gathering in the main square. Lots of people. 300 residents of Lowfield, plus guests, caravanners, merchants from Crest Hall, a delegation from Rivermark, even 3 from the far wall who had took 4 days to get here. Because today was the day, a special one, the anniversary of the store's opening and the signing of the contract. Down in the square, Minsaw was overseeing the preparations. Her voice was clear, her movements were quick. She was setting up tables, pointing out where to carry the food, checking that everything was in place. She had changed over the past year. Not on the outside, no. On the outside, she was still thin and dark-haired, with a habit of counting aloud. But inside, something had loosened. That spring that had kept her wound up and tight for 4 years had stopped creaking. She had learned to delegate, learned to let go, learned to fall asleep without counting. Ashley stood at the gate. She had returned from the caravan 3 weeks ago, tanned, strong, with a new knife on her hip, a gift from the blacksmith in Cross Hall, whose life she had saved from a pack of beasts on the way back. She leaned against the gatepost and looked out at the square, at the people, at the children running between the tables, at the noise, at life. And she didn't look away. Before, she had only looked for danger. Now she sometimes allowed herself to look at other things, at the warmth, at the living. She still slept on the roof, but now, sometimes, she wasn't alone. Sometimes Daniel would come up, and they would sit side by side, in silence. They looked at the stars, shining through the greenery in the sky. They didn't talk about their feelings. There was no need. She knew. He knew. That was enough. Song Young was in her office, as always. But the office had changed. 2 rooms, a full set of instruments, real ones, from pre-war stockpiles they'd found in a caravan 3 months ago. An examination table, shelves of medicine, not 3 little boxes, but 30. The system had been expanding the pharmacy section every month. Song Young no longer working in triage mode. She was treating patients, for real, routinely, with follow-up visits, with medical histories, with results. In a year, she had saved 11 lives that would have been lost under previous conditions. 11. She kept count, not out of pride, out of responsibility. Clarissa sat at her desk. The desk had grown to the size of a full-fledged office desk with 3 drawers and a built-in inkwell. Stacks of paper lay before her, reports, tables, hand-drawn charts. She kept track of the entire network. 5 locations: Lowfield, Cross Hall, Rivermark, Farwall, and the new one, Fort Briss in the south, opened a month ago. First deals, first tier. The walls were beginning to solidify. Clarissa knew every number, every product, every unit. Sometimes at night she would come to Daniel and they would discuss logistics, routes, optimization, inventory rotation between locations. And in those moments when the pencil flew across the paper and the numbers fell into place, Daniel saw her eyes light up, not with a headache remedy, with life. Haya was negotiating in the square, moving smoothly between groups. A word here, a gesture there, a smile. but not that old, forced one. A new one, her own. One she'd found somewhere over these past months among people who knew her real name and her real story, and hadn't turned away. Dom Khan no longer considered her his agent. They sent another one. He stayed for a week. He saw that Haya was happy, and he left. Even the merchant clans have a line they won't cross. Haya stood on the steps of the shop, 15 years old. She'd grown 2 centimeters in a year. Her face was still serious, but different, without fear. She held a notebook in her hands, her own. She kept track of the sweets and dried fruits. Her department, her responsibility. Not a single slip-up in a year, not a single mistake. Daniel once asked if she wanted to do something else.
Hannah looked at him as if he were crazy, and said that the shelves wouldn't take care of themselves.
By noon, the delegations had come out onto the square. 3 groups: the Scavengers Guild, the Order of the Grey Seal, House Khan. 3 factions that a year ago were ready to destroy each other for control over the world's ruins. Now they stood in the same square, together. Not because they had made peace, not because they had become friends, because they had a common place. Neutral, safe, where deals were fair and the tea was hot. Master Oretta had come in person. She stood slightly apart from her paladins, in a simple gray cloak, without armor. She came twice a year. Each time she drank tea with Daniel. Each time she was silent more than she spoke. Each time she left deep in thought. Today she nodded to Daniel across the square, briefly, as an equal. The representative of the Scavengers Guild, a heavy-set man in a leather apron with scars on his hands. A former inspector sent a year ago to take Lowfield under his wing, who stayed, who now coordinated excavations in the old cities under contracts with the shop. Not under his wing, in partnership. The House of Khan had sent a new representative. Not Teo, older, more serious, with authority. Teo sent a letter, congratulating him on the anniversary. Whether it was sincere or not, Daniel didn't know. And it didn't matter. 3 factions, 1 table, 1 scroll. Haya had handled the preparations. A month of negotiations, dozens of letters, 4 drafts, every word carefully weighed, every clause agreed upon. Clarissa checked the figures. Song Young added a clause on medical assistance along trade routes. Ashley approved the route safety protocol. Minsu compiled everything into a single document, an inter-faction trade agreement, the first in 15 years, since the Rift. Neutral trade routes, a single standard for transactions, protection of caravans, joint arbitration in disputes, neutral territory. The store in Lowfield. Daniel came down from the roof. He walked through the sales floor, past the shelves of merchandise, past the pharmacy section that had grown into an entire wing, past Clarissa's desk, piled high with papers, past Dr. Song Young's sign, past the counter behind which he had spent 365 nights. He stepped out onto the square. People parted, not out of fear, out of respect. He approached the table where the scroll lay. Representatives of the 3 factions stood on either side, Orata on the left, the guild on the right, Han's house across the way. Each placed a hand on the scroll. Each recited the formula of consent. Each affixed a seal. Then everyone looked at Daniel. He took the scroll, unrolled it, read it. Every line, every word, without haste. Then he looked up and gazed at the square, at the people, at Minsu, who stood by the shop door, holding Khan by the shoulder, at Ashley, who leaned against the gate with her arms crossed and didn't turn around, but he knew she was listening to every word, at Song Young in the office doorway, at Clarissa with a pencil behind her ear, at Heiyu, who stood among the delegates and smiled, at Bart and his wife, at Ferg at the gate, at the hunters, at the refugees from Hornwood, at the children, at the 300 people who a year ago had been a handful of ragged souls in a dead city. Daniel signed his name, his own, his real one, the one he used to sign invoices in Seattle, with the same hand movement, the same slant, the same sweeping D at the beginning and short O at the end. The square grew noisy, not applause, something else, a collective sigh, as if 300 people had simultaneously allowed themselves to breathe. The system flashed in the corner of his eye, quietly, without fanfare. Store level, 50. Skill unlocked. Branch network. Connection established. Daniel looked toward the horizon and saw, out on the wasteland, far away, at the very edge of visibility, lights. 4 points of light in 4 directions. Crosshall to the south, Rivmark to the north, the far wall to the west, Fort Briss to the southeast. 4 stores, 4 anchors, 4 points where the walls grew stronger, where they healed, where they fed, where they didn't deceive. The network. It was working. He could feel it. Not through the system. Something deeper. A sensation for which there was no word in the language of retail. A sensation that the world beneath their feet was standing a little firmer than yesterday. Minsu climbed onto the roof, stood beside him, said nothing, just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, like that night with the refugees, like afterward, just like always. Daniel looked at her. She was looking at the lights. Then she turned, and he saw in her eyes what he saw every day, but for the first time allowed himself to name, not with a word, with recognition. She was the first. She came with trembling hands and a medallion she didn't want to give up. She stayed because for the first time in years, someone had refused to take it. And she had grown from an exhausted older sister into a person whom all of Lowfield knew by name and respected, not for her strength, but for the way she placed a mug of tea in front of everyone who entered the store. Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. She knew. He knew. Downstairs, Hannah stepped out onto the porch. She looked up. She saw them on the roof. She waved. Then she went back to the shelves, because the dried fruit wouldn't count itself. Ashley climbed up, silently. She stood on the other side, without touching, but close by. She looked at the horizon, at the lights, at the wasteland. Then she said quietly that the horizon was clear. No creatures. For the first time in a week. Song Young stepped out onto the porch below. She tilted her head back. She saw the 3 of them on the roof. She shook her head, said they'd catch a cold, then went back inside, to lock up the office. The workday was over. Clarissa didn't get up. She was doing the math. Daniel could hear the pencil scratching on the paper even from here. She was calculating the annual turnover, the final statement. Numbers that would tell the story better than any words. Haya down in the square was talking to a representative from the House of Khan. She wasn't playing a role. She was herself, the self she had found behind the store counter where no one asked her to pretend. The square below was emptying. People were heading home, to their own homes, down the streets they had built themselves, across the pavements they had laid themselves, to the hearths they had built themselves, to a city that hadn't existed a year ago, but now lived and breathed and smelled of fresh bread and mint. Daniel stood on the roof. The wind picked up, warm, smelling of smoke and salt and something floral carried in from the western fields. He looked at the system. It glowed quietly, calmly, without flickering. Level 50, 5 branches, 3,207 transactions for the year, 0 violations.
Population of the zone of influence, 1,200 people. Status of the border between worlds. Stabilization, in progress. Stabilization in progress, not complete, not guaranteed, but in progress. The world was still reeling. The rifts were still oozing. Creatures were still roaming the wastelands. But every day, every transaction, every honest hand extended across the counter made the world a little stronger. And somewhere far to the north, in the ruins of the capital, in the basement of an old bank, lay yet another dusty journal, in Korean, dated 1991, 4 years after Chen's death, a year after the Great Rift. Someone had tried to open a store after the catastrophe. Someone in a ruined world had found the system and tried. That someone had failed. The magazine ended on the 3rd page, but it existed, and someone invisible was flipping through it right now, with fingers that shouldn't have existed. Daniel didn't know that. Not yet. But he would find out, because the network was growing. And with every new store, the world told him a little more about itself, about its wounds, about its secrets, about those who came before him and tried to keep the doors open. He climbed down from the roof, walked through the 3rd floor, through the 2nd, down the stairs to the 1st, stood behind the counter, placed his hands on the tabletop, that very one, made of a split plank, which he had wiped down with a rag on the first day. The crack had long since healed. The wood had become smooth and dark from hundreds of touches. His touches, and others. Everyone who had placed their wares on that counter, their ring, their pain, their trust. The shop was quiet. Everyone had left. The holiday was over. Evening was taking hold. The light from the crystals grew softer, warmer. Daniel stood behind the counter and felt the wood beneath his palms. And for the first time in his entire life, not just in this world, he was exactly and completely in his place. Not a store manager in Seattle who did his job well but didn't know why, but a man who keeps the doors open, because behind those doors lies a whole world. Tomorrow will be a new day, new customers, new deals, new problems. The courier from Crest Hall should arrive by noon, the Con House caravan by evening. Song Young is waiting for a shipment of tools. Clarissa is preparing the quarterly report. Ashley is planning the route for the new caravan heading east. Haya is negotiating the 6th retail location. Minsu will set a mug of tea on the counter for him in the morning. Silence. Just like every day. Hana will adjust the merchandise on the shelf, by a millimeter, just like every day. And Daniel will open the door, just like every day.